Welcome to the fantasy audiobook. Game of Thrones. I'm flying a dragon on your face, how do you respond? Chapter 1. The clear night was as cool as water, and the moonlight shrouded the hills like a veil. In the towering stone fortress, Hygeia put his slender arms on the edge of the window and stared at the sparkling black water river outside the window with his purple eyes. The world of A Song of Ice and Fire is such a big joke. Before Hygeia traveled through time, he was one of the few college students in the village. After graduation, he returned to his hometown and became a Daoist priest. One of his favorite American TV series was A Song of Ice and Fire. Unfortunately, the early stage was too brutal. At first, he thought Ned was the protagonist, but it clicked in episode 10. Later I thought Rob and Caitlin were the protagonists, but the Red Wedding was totally ruined. At that time, I was so cruel that my mentality collapsed. Hygeia felt that he had been fooled by the screenwriter and Uncle Martin, and he was so angry that he never watched the subsequent episodes again. It wasn't until many years later that I heard that the prequel to A Song of Ice and Fire, The Dragon King, was about to be released. I quickly found a commentary video on a website to reappreciate the grand worldview of the world of ice and fire and the beauty of the actors. What? Why not read the original novel? Who among the serious people reads the original novel? Is it because the milky white Yukiko doesn't look good, or is it because she can't get the looks of European and American actors? Thinking back to when he saw the scene where the little devil escaped from the prostitute, when he was young, he once suspected that the actors were real. Among the American TV dramas he had watched, only Spartacus had the highest color rating. Jinang and one of the longer and shorter. This is too long. He once suffered from a deep inferiority complex. Later, domestically produced products also came up, which made him feel a passion to surpass the British and pursue the beautiful. Ahem, I'm talking about the length of the TV series. Getting back to the topic, someone may have said, why are Daoist priests still in college? Hygeia originally thought so. In front of the towering university gate, he said that it was impossible to be a Daoist priest. He would starve to death or freeze to death without eating the rice of a Daoist priest. But he was careless and never thought that he would be unemployed after graduation. He really couldn't survive in the city, so he could only pick up the mantle of his old father and became a Daoist priest and a rural Daoist priest. Don't underestimate rural religious people. People in the village attach great importance to feng shui for divination. How can they do it without Daoist priests and monks when building a house, laying foundations, performing feng shui acupoints, dipping food to ward off evil spirits, or seeking marriage and wealth? So as long as you are diligent enough and don't get into some bad habits of real punishment, Hygeia really dares to say, even if you don't have great wealth, you can be well off. Moreover, Hygeia's family is not just a fake Daoist priest, there are Daoist priests who give ultimatums. A certain ancestor of the 18th generation or above actually came down the mountain as a Daoist priest and passed down such a family legacy. And Hygeia's father is more open-minded. He often talks about, if you are not educated, you will suffer, you must believe in science. And so on. So he insisted on sending his son to school regardless of other people's strange looks. Hygeia was laughed at by the children when he was a child. He often skipped classes and got poor grades. His father also used 7 horses to, hardly, beat his buttocks several times. After the beating, he had to apologize. To encourage students to learn, such as I didn't review well back then, otherwise I wouldn't have, etc. He originally planned to stay in a big city as a teacher or something after Hygeia graduated from university. It didn't matter whether he was working or not, the main thing was to teach and educate people and be respected. But he didn't expect that living in the city would be difficult. Seeing his son starving and emaciated in the big city for 3 days and 9 meals, the old father couldn't bear to see the white-haired man giving away the black-haired man. After sitting silently in the room all night, he finally pass on the Daoist mantle to Hygeia. Not to mention, although Hygeia slipped through the 9-year compulsory education, he spent all 4 years of college skipping classes, playing games, and reading novels. But he is quite talented in Daoist classics, magic spells, and fasting rituals. After all, it is a family tradition. After 2 or 3 years of this, Hygeia will definitely grow into an excellent rural Daoist priest. But who would have thought that time travel would happen so unexpectedly? Heir, no, it should be said to be Jaehaerys Targaryen now, is the third son of Mad King Aerys II. The original plot has changed here. Mad King, Aerys II and Queen Layla only have 3 children in the plot, the eldest son Rhaegar, the second son Viserys and the posthumous son Daenerys. Although the queen was pregnant during this period, she experienced many miscarriages, so in the original plot, there are only 3 surviving children, which coincides with the motto, the dragon has 3 heads. But for some reason, Queen Layla gave birth to twins in the year 276 of the conquest calendar, 17 years after giving birth to Rhaegar. The older brother who was born first was named Viserys, and the younger brother who was born later was named Jaehaerys, respectively to commemorate the 2 grandsons of Dragon King Aegon I and the 2 sons of Aerys I, the second-generation king of the Targaryen dynasty. In the second year after Viserys and Jaehaerys were born, Aerys II encountered the rebellion in Duskendale. After returning to King's Landing, his temper became more cruel, he liked to burn people with wildfire, and his relationship with his ministers became even worse. After the wrong spring, Rhaegar eloped with Lyanna Stark. Brandon Stark, the successor of Winterfell, rushed to King's Landing to question him, but was undoubtedly imprisoned. Then Aerys II summoned the North Rickard Stark, the guardian of the realm and Duke of Winterfell, burned him to death, and Brandon Stark was also strangled to death with a torture instrument in order to save his father. The War of the Usurpers thus began. The 4 families of Wolf, Deer, Fish and Eagle rebelled with their troops. After 2 years of fighting, they finally defeated Rhaegar at the Trident River, laying the foundation for victory. Then the rebels arrived at the gates of the city, and the Mad King arranged for people to escort Rhaella and Viserys to Dragonstone, the last stronghold of the Targaryen family in Westeros. However, the wife and children of the eldest son Rhaegar were not sent to Dragonstone because of the Mad King's decision. In the end, after the Lannister family backstabbed, Rhaegar's wife Elia Maltair and his 2 children died tragically at the hands of the Mountain. Then, on a stormy day 9 months later on Dragonstone, Queen Rhaella would die after giving birth to Daenerys. Stannis Baratheon continued to kill them all on Robert's orders and captured Dragonstone. Viserys and Daenerys were taken to Essos by Sir William Darry. After Sir William's death, the 2 were driven away by servants and became completely homeless. Although Viserys claimed the Iron Throne, he had no money and wandered between the free cities of Essos. Forced by life, he could only sell the crown given to him by Queen Rhaella, becoming a complete beggar king. And now Hegia has become Viserys's younger brother. According to the inheritance law of the Iron Throne system, he is currently the 3rd heir to the Iron Throne. In front of him are Aegon Targaryen, who is still breastfeeding, and his brother Viserys, followed by Rhaegar's daughter Rhaenys and dragon mother, Daenerys. But no matter what succession order he is in, Jaehaerys has no heart to fight for hegemony. On the one hand, in his view, the 7 kingdoms surrendered on the surface, but kept making small moves in secret. Sitting on the Iron Throne is neither soft nor warm, but also timid and cautious. On the other hand, before crossing, he was an ordinary person. He didn't have many minds. If he wanted to play the game of power with those nobles with 800 minds, he might be sold out and have to help count money. At this moment, Jaehaerys just wanted to lie down and find a place to hide, wait for Daenerys to sit on the Iron Throne, and then come out to let her be the Prince of Dragonstone, and then live a decadent aristocratic life with no worries about food and clothing. Of course, he would also remind the Dragon Queen to be careful of Jon Snow, and don't let him be killed before the dawn of victory like the original HBO plot, which would be a pity for hundreds of millions of Game of Thrones fans. The timeline that Jaehaerys traveled through was when Rhaegar was killed in the Battle of the Trident, not long after the fall of the Targaryen dynasty. The Black Wings brought black news. When the news of Rhaegar's army's tragic defeat at what was later known as the Ruby Ford was spread to King's Landing by Raven, those who had the conditions had already been moisturized, and those who did not have the conditions were also panic-stricken. Robert Baratheon is described as a giant with a green face and fangs, 9 feet tall, and the cavalry in the north are all riding giant wolves, choosing people to eat. The imperial ministers who were harmed had to close the 7 doors tightly and take strict precautions. At this time, even the blind man knew that something was going to change. Needless to say, as an old bookworm, Jaehaerys didn't panic at first. Why, these days, who hasn't read a few time travel novels? The crossing belt system is standard. Like the divine system, the pretentious system, the villain system. In a word, the system is flying all over the place. It makes readers fascinated and wish they could take their own lives. Now the opportunity has come, all that's left is the system. Oh my God, what about my system? Jaehaerys didn't care about the surprised looks of others. Under the gaze of the young girl passing by, he kept patting his chest and touching his face, twisting his buttocks and placing his hands on his hips. His posture was so enchanting. Later, he even touched his whole body. The man who had been single for 50 years was so embarrassed that he even became a shadow. But he was almost familiar with the cells, but he still didn't find any trace of the system. He couldn't do it with physics, so he tried more than 100 spells. As a Daoist priest, he even used Buddhist and Nestorian teachings, but the result was that there were no systematic traces. The next day, everyone in King's Land spread the news that His Highness Jaehaerys likes to flirt in front of beautiful girls, trying to attract their attention, so as to achieve some unspeakable purpose. What purpose? Hey, have you never seen a male bird in full bloom? Jaehaerys was still thinking about how to turn on the system at first, and was hesitating whether to jump off a building or hit a wall. But then he saw the teasing looks in the guards' eyes and the teasing of the maids intentionally or unintentionally, so he asked someone to inquire. I blanch. As a time traveler, it doesn't matter if there is no system. Why do you still arrange to be in trouble? This is simply unbelievable. I'm still a child. Why? So, he tried to let everyone understand that he really didn't mean to make those unsightly actions, but, well, he was in a hurry, yes, just in a hurry. Understand. However, everyone showed understanding expressions and said that he was a normal boy, just a little precocious. In the end, even the queen heard about it. Queen Layla dragged her tired steps and touched her head kindly, and told him earnestly, "Don't be impatient, you are still young. When he is older in a few years, she will make the decision to find him a noble family, lady." The operation was as fierce as a tiger's, and everyone in Junline smiled like an ant, and even enthusiastically called him, eager, Jaehaerys. Even the tense atmosphere of the impending war was somewhat diluted. Jaehaerys was on the verge of tears, he couldn't take the pot off. I'm tired of trying to defend myself in vain. Destroy it. After accepting the reality that there was no system, he panicked a little, but he was not afraid. After all, according to the original plot, the queen and her cheap brother Viserys had already arrived on Dragonstone before the fall of King's Landing. And now that he is a time traveler, can the storm take over the royal fleet on Dragonstone Island again? Joke. By then, our Long family will have hundreds of warships at sea, blocking Blackwater Bay, preventing any Junline board from entering the sea, and heavily defending Dragonstone Island on land to protect our base. I have 2 kings and 4 2s, tell me how to lose. Hollow down pointing triangle. After having no worries about my life, I am full and warm. Ahem, this night is really hard. How many nights before the time travel, the screen was full of young ladies with slim waists and long legs accompanying him through the long dark nights, soothing his lonely single heart. But after time travel, he didn't get the slightest benefit from the so-called decadent aristocratic life of drunkenness and wealth. The rebellion of the 4 families of deer, wolf, eagle and fish has been going on for 2 years. In order to raise military pay, the Iron Throne was just 3 feet away from the throne. The real sky is 3 feet high and the earth is thin. After Rhaegar's defeat, King's Landing lost contact with many of the king's small nobles, and lost the support of the king's territory. How to feed the 500,000 people of King's Landing who were waiting for food? Prices in King's Landing are soaring now. 10 copper coins can only buy a pumpkin, 1 silver deer can buy 10 pounds of brown rice, and 1 golden dragon can only buy 10 pounds of beef. After the time travel, there was no Miss Hesse, so it was okay to look at the maids. However, Queen Layla was afraid that he would make a mistake, so she actually changed all his maids. Oh my God, they all looked like flowers. The kind who has a strong physique and can crush an apple with his arms. After asking, I found out that they were originally strong women who did laundry and cleaning, and were recently promoted to maids. I can't get through this day. Jaehaerys lay on the bed feeling a little sleepy, thinking of the beauty he had lost, the short movies he had watched, and the morning lessons and spiritual practice he had done. Anyway, he was idle, so he sat cross-legged, with the curtains drawn behind him, silently practicing the method of preaching at home. Hey, guess what? He actually felt small bright spots like fireflies flying around him. When the small bright spots penetrate into the body, a cold feeling is felt, just like taking a sip of ice-cold sour plum soup on a hot day. And with the return of consciousness, those bright lights flashed away like meteor showers in the sky and disappeared without a trace. After repeated experiments, he began to try to actively absorb it into his body. A suction force rushed out from his dantian, and continuously absorbed the bright spot into his body through his mouth, nose, and skin. Until the suction force of his dantian disappeared, he regained consciousness. When absorbing the bright spot, he seemed to have the legendary inner vision. The bright spot was like the bright stars in the night sky, rotating and compressing around his dantian in an orderly manner, and finally formed a dense nebula. At this time, his dantian was warm, and the fatigue of his whole body was swept away. Jaehaerys smacked his lips. This thing is a bit like the spiritual energy described in the novels of cultivation. When he first saw the novels of the type of fantasy cultivation, he stupidly asked his father if there was spiritual energy in the world. His father immediately frowned and scolded, "Did you secretly read novels in class again?" Then he drew out 7 fierce horses and staged a family ethics drama of fatherly kindness giving and filial piety, haha. Those who have watched the series of A Song of Ice and Fire know that this world is actually a magical world with strange magic and creatures. After the dragon mother's dragon egg hatched, wizards and shadowbinders all over the world felt the return of magic. So, could these little bright spots be the magic of this world? Thinking of this, Jaehaerys called it Aura according to his habit. As soon as he heard the name, he had the taste of fairyland. Why not call it magic power or magic? My God, I have traveled through time, so I can't do it according to my own preferences. In fact, to put it bluntly, it's still because of reading fantasy novels. Let's talk about the He family's Daoist method. It is based on Daoist classics, regardless of the difference between sects, emphasizing the dual cultivation life, and using inner alchemy to enter the Dao and become immortal. However, compared with the orthodox Daoist canon, it is unknown to outsiders. According to He's father, the ancestor of the He family was also a brilliant talent. He was once a candidate for the imperial examination and was ordered to compile Daoist classics. He gathered the strengths of hundreds of schools and learned Daoist magical powers by integrating them, thus creating the He family's internal Qi technique. The spirit in the air is light, and the family-inherited Daoist method is powerful. Inhale it into the dantian to form a sea of stars, and from then on, you will not be afraid of swords and guns. It has been passed down from generation to generation that if the internal energy technique is practiced to the extreme, one can achieve the status of earthly immortals and live for 1,000 years, but no one has ever really done it. Even the ancestor of the He family was only slightly longer lived, and it is said that he died at the age of 90. However, the He family members who have practiced internal energy are more or less stronger than ordinary people. Fasting and dipping rituals are all physical work, especially when they go to some remote mountainous areas where there is no access to vehicles and horses to open a Daoist temple. The He family members run faster than mountain kids. So over time, in the mouths of outsiders, the He family is also known as a well-known Daoist priest with real skills. With the spiritual energy as a foundation, Jaehaerys tried some of the family's Daoist methods, such as opening the light and lighting talismans without fire, which are easy to do, and more advanced. What? Readers haven't heard it yet, don't be shy, be brave. Jaehaerys said, I don't know how to do it. I haven't learned it yet, and the soul has come here. Where can I learn those high-level spells? I should have swallowed it whole and memorized all the spells at that time. Now I only have spiritual energy and don't know how to use it. How frustrating. Thinking about the spells such as thunder control, wind control, guessing numbers through walls, and 5 elements escape, Jaehaerys' saliva is almost flowing down. Forget it, forget it. Fortunately, the family tradition also records some spells, which is enough for a low magic world. The most powerful guy in this world should be the Night King. I don't know if the exorcism spell can solve his corpse ghost army. Jaehaerys fell asleep slowly in excitement and uneasiness. Early the next morning, a scream resounded through the Red Castle. The soldiers thought they were invaded by the enemy and rushed to the source of the sound. But this direction, why does it seem to be heading to the location of the royal bedroom? Before crossing over, the two twins of the royal family had a very good relationship and were still young, so they lived together. But after crossing over, in order not to expose the secret of occupying the magpie's nest, and for better practice, Jaehaerys chose a room with a window facing east after reporting to Queen Layla. Perhaps the servants in the castle secretly expressed their understanding. After all, in the nearly 300 years of history of the kingdom, many brothers who were originally close to each other in the lord's family suddenly became like strangers or even enemies one day. It's all because of the inheritance. But Viserys didn't understand. He thought that Jaehaerys betrayed the feelings and ties between their twin brothers. So after crossing over for so long, Viserys would be furious whenever he saw him. Once, he even wanted to beat him when the adults were not around. Can Jaehaerys spoil him? Although beating the other party feels like beating himself, he feels that the task of saving the bear child is urgent. Although Jaehaerys was also a child, he had a lot of experience in fighting in his previous life. All the children in the village were defeated by him. Of course, it was easy for him to beat a child like a small dog. That beating almost made the naughty child doubt his life. In a trance, he saw his grandmother waving at him. My stupid brother, from now on, we will talk about our own things. When there are people, I will call you brother, and when there is no one, you will call me father. Do you hear me? Brother, what are you looking for? Dad will help you find it. So Viserys limped away. He wanted to say something harsh when he turned around, but he was afraid that he would chase him out and beat him. That was really from his father. Bah, the iron fist of his younger brother. What's more infuriating is that Jaehaerys was still talking about sarcastic things behind him, such as leaning on his legs, the wrath of the sleeping dragon, etc. Although he didn't understand, it didn't stop Viserys from complaining to his mother. For Queen Rhaella, who was pregnant again, with her eldest son dead in battle and the rebels at the gates, how could she care about the quarrels between the two brothers? She only thought about these two troublesome things. Didn't she understand the principle of brothers fighting outside the wall to defend against insults? So she called the two brothers and gave each of them 50 lashes. Viserys looked at Jaehaerys's malicious smile, and remembered the fear of being pressed to the ground and rubbed, and couldn't help trembling. After Rhaella taught him a lesson, she went back to the palace to rest. In her opinion, at this time when the country was shaken, even children had to learn to grow up. These two children were spoiled by her, and letting them quiet down would help them grow up. As for Viserys being beaten black and blue, this might be the price paid for growing up. As for the twins' father, well, we may forget him for a while. For a madman who wanted to ignite wildfires buried in every corner of King's Landing when the rebels captured King's Landing, so as to drag all the people of King's Landing to their deaths, what did the little son's inappropriate trouble count for? So under the premise that his parents didn't care and his brother didn't dare to come over after being beaten, Jaehaerys became a free man. Without being disturbed, he absorbed spiritual energy and prepared to build a foundation in one fell swoop. As soon as the starry sea became wide, the world was wide, and Xiaoji slept peacefully. Who would have thought that the day when the heart tree stretched out was when the spiritual energy was taken away? Jaehaerys looked at the guards outside the door, with a bitter face to say that it was okay, waved his hand to let them leave, and turned back and lay on the bed with no desire to live. His eyes were empty, his face was pale, as if he had lost his soul. Where is this huge ball of bright spiritual energy? That's right. After he woke up, he was going to continue looking inside the spiritual energy nebula. After all, since he had a good thing, he had to explore it in the first few days, right? This inner vision, my goodness, is complete. The spiritual energy disappeared while he was sleeping. Jaehaerys. Fortunately, the inner vision special effect did not disappear, so he used his shining titanium alloy eyes to patrol his body, scanning inch by inch, with a posture of digging into the root. After a long search, he found the suspect, person, thing in the heart. There was a green sapling bathing in the spiritual energy, stretching out its jade-like branches and leaves, with short white fluff on the branches, and the roots were as thin as silver threads. Some roots crawled into the chi channels in the heart, and twitched for a while, and then the shining spiritual energy was absorbed into the trunk. The sapling seemed to sense Jaehaerys's prying, and the branches and leaves quickly hugged each other, wrapping up all the spiritual energy around it. Jaehaerys cursed, "What's the matter? You stole my spiritual energy and didn't let me see it." The sapling stretched out a branch and shook it, but the palm-shaped branch had 4 smaller leaves that were still curled up, leaving only one leaf dangling there, like a universal international gesture. Jaehaerys was so angry that he almost exploded. The spiritual energy was the foundation of his existence in the world of ice and fire, and it was all taken away by the green thing. It even raised its middle finger to mock itself. Is it bullying itself for not having a temper? This is intolerable. I really can't swallow this anger today. In my body, how can you still bully me? You still won't return my spiritual energy. Jaehaerys gestured to the sapling with his eyes. Don't ask how to send his eyes to his heart. This is all about inner vision. The main focus is a magic. Silly K. Hey, why are you still swearing? Jaehaerys was so anxious that he didn't realize that he and the sapling could talk directly. He didn't react until he finished speaking. Green light shines from the chest, gradually forming an illusory image. The trunk, branches, and rhizomes of the saplings are transformed into the trunk, head, facial features, and limbs. There are 2 leaves on the body in several places, and the skin is pale, brown. Little Groot, is that you? Oh my god. Jaehaerys covered his mouth in surprise. It's not that I'm shy, but I'm afraid that I can't help but reach out and pick up the leaves on it. After all, we are negotiating now, so be serious. You are blind, I am not that unlucky thing. Listen up. My name is Duobao Meowling Tree. It is the ancestral tree of the Daoist court. The Duobao Meowling immortal root under you is also, strictly speaking, we are still fellow villagers. Fellow, you also came from the earth. Wait a minute, then how did you end up in my heart? And was my spiritual energy eaten by you? You still hold on to it and won't let go, right? Well, actually, brother, you should thank me. Hey, you still need to rake it, right? Hey, I'm not happy to say that. If it weren't for me, this body would have died a long time ago, and it's your turn to come through and resurrect it. According to this little tree man, it had crossed the world barrier and arrived here 7 years ago. Although Queen Layla had a pair of fetuses in her belly, one of them was very thin and was about to be absorbed by the other. However, when it passed by, it showed great mercy and turned into a seed and drilled into its heart. It was precisely because of its spirituality that the 2 twins were able to live in peace and were born safely. Of course, it also exhausted its immortal power in order to save people, and had to fall into a deep sleep until it was attracted by Jaehaerys' aura and revived. To put it this way, I really have to thank you, Aang. No need to be polite, who can make this immortal be merciful? Lord Immortal Jen, you see that you have recovered now. Are you going to move to your own immortal palace? Jaehaerys looked expectant. Don't rely on me anymore, and leave quickly. The little tree man spread his hands and said, that can't be done. Seeing that Jaehaerys was about to get angry, it immediately explained. Brother, you can't rely on me for this. It turns out that after absorbing the spiritual power refined by Jaehaerys, it formed a symbiotic relationship with it. If it grows to a certain level, it can cast a spell to escape. But at this time, when it has just sprouted, it is the most vulnerable and powerless time, and it is impossible to dissolve this symbiotic relationship. Yes, it is even more fragile now than when it was a seed. At least the seed coat is tough and difficult to penetrate. If it were outside, any cow or horse could knock it over. So don't say it can't be helped, even if it is available, it won't leave. Then can you please stop drawing my spiritual energy from me in the future? I'll try my best. It doesn't matter if you don't leave. It doesn't matter if you draw some spiritual energy. You have to give me some compensation, right? As an immortal, you can just give me a 9-turn golden elixir or something. Well, I should give you some compensation. Ahem, brother, listen to me. When I bear fruit, you don't know, my fruit is getting better. Let me tell you. Wait a minute, wouldn't you say you have to wait 180 years? You don't have to wait that long. It doesn't matter how long you wait. What's important is that the effect is powerful. What if eating a longevity fruit will increase your lifespan by 100 years? The enlightenment fruit will allow you to learn spells without a teacher. There are also magic fruit, magical power fruit and so on. Jaehaerys was very angry. Dao Tinglingen deceived me, who was ignorant and could not bear to face me as a thief, and openly deceived me in front of me. It's not that outrageous to draw a big pie. Even if I want to CPU, I don't have to look at who I am. The acting is not careless, there is a hint of bragging in the perfunctory exaggeration, and it is full of loopholes. I give this acting a 7 points and the lines 3 points. Don't want the remaining 90 points. Ha ha ha. So not only do you not pay the rent, but you also plan to eat and drink from me. He sneered. To deal with such a shameless tenant, I'll cut off the water and electricity to see what you do. Brother, why are you so stubborn? Hey, what are you going to do? Are you biting your fingers? You're such a ruthless person. I saw Jaehaerys bite a small hole in the middle fingers of his hands, and round beads of blood came out. His hands were like flying, and he passed over the Tanjong, Tianqi, Zongting, Shenfeng and other acupuncture points in turn, and at the same time muttered something in his mouth. The official of the monarch, the gods are about to come out, and the energy of creation will be strong and spiritual. Use the energy to control the messengers, and the energy and blood will be sealed. In an instant, Jaehaerys's face suddenly turned pale, and a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of his mouth. He quickly wiped it away with his sleeve, his eyes showing fierceness, like an old cat that was driven into panic. The little tree man in the sky now looked a bit like a holographic projection with poor signal, and the leaves became listless for a moment. It's a bit confusing, right? Are you going to fight to the death over this little spiritual energy? For it, from ancient times to Jifa, as the accompanying spiritual root of the big boss, it has not seen any ghosts and monsters, but it really has never been seen just for such a small amount of spiritual energy. Well, it is very little for it, less than the tip of a needle. You have to work hard. Brother, don't be impulsive. Impulsiveness is the devil. You are still young and cannot go further and further down the road of seeking death. Not yet. In just 1 or 2 breaths, Jaehaerys's lips began to turn blue and purple, and his eyesight turned faintly black. This was because his heart stopped supplying blood and his brain began to lack oxygen. Return. How can I return a hammer after it has been digested? However, don't you just want some benefits? It's okay, I am a man with many treasures and wonderful spiritual roots, traveling around the world, mainly focusing on being wealthy. I think back then, if I hadn't been dedicated to cultivation, just because of my immortality, the celestial grass immortals we hooked up with would have to be lined up from Nantianmen to Penglai East Road. Brother, I don't want your spiritual energy in vain. I can compensate you with something good, okay? So, can you let go of the restrictions first? Brother, I can't breathe anymore. No, you give it first. Jaehaerys was almost out of breath, and his eyesight went black. That's not true. My eyes are rolling up. Okay. The human-shaped shadow of the little sapling made a gesture, and a hole was opened on the tiny tree trunk inside the hard orifice, and a bright blood-colored elixir floated out from it. It was originally only the size of a grain of rice. In the blink of an eye, the space becomes as big as a dragon eye. Invite me, the shadow shouted, and the blood-colored elixir appeared in front of Jaehaerys regardless of physical obstacles. Jaehaerys stretched out his hand to grab it and put it in his pocket without looking carefully. Immediately afterwards, he formed a mudra with his hands and solved the acupoints with trembling fingers. He made 2 mistakes in the middle and almost missed the breath. Jasper makeup is as tall as a tree. You think I'm coward? The ban on chi and blood will hurt both sides. Let's see if your kid still has a fever. After a while, Jaehaerys finally recovered, and by then the shadow had disappeared. Hey, who is that? Groot, come out and fight. No, explain. My name is Duobao Miaoshu. A voice came directly to Jaehaerys's head. Hey, is it so magical? It's just the most basic means of communicating with spiritual consciousness. What a surprise, there are no mortal people who have ever seen the world. Can you please say those last 3 words without using the tense? I am happy, do you want me to take care of it? Chi blood seal. You're just kidding me, can't I change it? Jaehaerys withdrew his gesticulating hands and banned him again. That's impossible, it almost happened that time. Qi and blood sealing is a kind of qi restraining method in Daoist teachings. The original intention is to intercept the internal qi and prevent it from dissipating. Later, our ancestors discovered that it was quite effective for temporarily stopping bleeding, so it was passed down more as a first aid method. After all, practitioners who travel through mountains and ridges and hang ropes to collect medicine will always encounter injuries and bleeding. When Jaehaerys heard that the sapling not only wanted to intercept the spiritual energy, but also refused to give any benefits, his barbaric attitude came to mind, and he instantly remembered the method of blocking energy and blood. He didn't know he was feeling so uncomfortable beforehand, and he just wanted everyone to be safe, but when he saw it, it turned out that it was a mistake. Tell me, what is this elixir used for? 2. Brother, this is a good thing. Just listen to me. According to Duobao Miaoshu, these are fairy grass crimson beads. After being formed, they are refined into elixirs by immortals. Practitioners who take them have the effect of enlightening their minds, taking root and building their foundation. What is most important to a practitioner? Of course, the foundation is the most important. Only when the foundation is stable can you go further on the path of spiritual practice. Isn't this the foundation establishment pill in the novel? Jaehaerys picked up the pill and looked at it carefully. The texture of the pill was slightly hard, smooth and translucent on the outside, and red and purple on the inside. Foundation building pill. That kind of thing is not even worthy of my Jiangsu elixir to carry my shoes. It was refined by an immortal. Duobao Miaoshu mocked disdainfully, although the Jiangsu is just a spiritual grass with a touch of fairy energy. The product is just the work of an elixir practitioner from MIT, but that does not prevent it from being an otherworldly elixir. The effect is awesome. Jaehaerys was dubious and did not eat in a hurry. Instead, he turned his palm and put it in his arms. Then, let's talk about spiritual energy in the future. Circle dot operator hollow down pointing triangle circle dot operator that elixir just now. What elixir? Mine. I didn't say it wasn't yours. Isn't one elixir enough to compensate for the spiritual energy I will absorb in the future? Don't you quite understand its value? Stop. One code equals one code. That elixir is your compensation for my spiritual energy loss, mental loss, and image compensation. After a random twist, the Lingbao wonderful tree was stunned. Wait, what is the image compensation fee? Just because you stole my aura without saying a word, causing me to look disheveled in front of everyone, and losing my grace, dignity, and dignity. Isn't this your fault? Jaehaerys rolled his eyes. Well, that makes sense. From now on, you can take away the spiritual energy I have absorbed, and we will split it half and half. After all, we all have to practice. But, Brother Ming is settling the accounts. You have to calculate the expenses for using and venting your anger, plus, and so on. 1 crimson pearl pill a day, or something of equal value, isn't it too much? Jaehaerys asked. He took out a piece of parchment, which seemed to be torn from some book. There were some patterns on the back, but at this time he was holding the quill pen carefully and listing the charges without paying attention at all. Wait a minute, you still charge for both entry and exit. What does this garbage disposal fee mean? Lingbao Miaoshu was stunned. He had never seen an income item as detailed as this. The last time he saw it was in the 31st year of Hades' kingdom. Tax comes after 60 years. No, you are eating, drinking, and urinating in my heart all day long. Isn't it easy for the exhaust gas to cause blood clots? Not to mention urinating, but it is all flowing with my blood throughout my body. Wow, just think about it. Is it disgusting? I risked my life just to help you grow. I'm an immortal root. How can I have diarrhea? If the spiritual energy enters my belly, if something breaks out, you will pull my head and kick it like a ball. Duobao Miaoshu was so angry that it directly formed facial features on the trunk, like a child winked. However, because it is too compact, it gives people the impression of being too milky and fierce. Well, if that's the case, we won't charge you for the garbage disposal fee, but we have to charge you for the environmental management fee. Jaehaerys said with compassion, look at you, a tree growing in my heart. Grow up slowly, right? It is very likely to destroy the balance of the inner ecosystem and put an increasing burden on my heart. No, I am an immortal. How can I really take root in your heart? But you can. I am the immortal root of Daoism, do you understand? The people of Daoism are ethereal, they can be virtual or real, neither virtual nor real, somewhere between virtual and real. Chi and blood. No, you have something to say. Why are you so impatient? I didn't say I disagreed. Duobao Miaoshu said his heart. It's not that I'm afraid of him, the main thing is, that's right. Jade does not compete with tiles. I am an immortal, I cannot argue with ordinary people, otherwise the price will drop. 1 Jiangsu pill a day, do you agree? No, 1 every 10 days, this thing is too expensive, and I don't have much stock. Duo Bao Miaoshu said aggrievedly, although there was a mixture of truth and falsehood in this sentence. The false thing is that it is not expensive but very cheap. Everyone in heaven knows that the Crimson Pearl is only suitable for practitioners in the foundation building stage. In heaven, it is like the sand on the beach on earth. Some fairies like to string the Crimson Pearl into a bead curtain because it is cheap and buy a big bag at a time. It is true that it really does not have much stock. After all, few people are willing to use the Crimson Pearl to make pills. It is too wasteful of time and mana, and the gain does not outweigh the loss. In the Jifa era, even Daoism did not dare to waste mana and spiritual energy like this. Besides, even if Duo Bao Miaoshu has a mustard seed-sized space for Zumi, it is large but cannot hold useless things. The one it gave away was from a long time ago. It is more commemorative, so it kept some. When negotiating a price, you can't set a limit all at once. You have to dare to make an offer, and you can't let boring numbers limit your imagination. Even if it's a moldy toothpick, you have to say that it was used by the old Buddha. Look, Jaehaerys also suffered from his lack of knowledge, otherwise anything he picked up would be better than the Crimson Pearl pill. 1 pill every 3 days, I'm very sincere. 6 days. No more. 1 pill every 5 days, it really can't be any less. This is my bottom line, if it's less, please find another high branch. Okay. Duo Bao Miaoshu's little face was aggrieved, and he was really worried. Calculating his inventory of Crimson Pearl pills, at most he can only cope with 10 days, and then give it to others, it's a pity. Daoisting immortal root, penetrated into his body, life is not easy, the little tree sighed. After settling the rent and fees issues, other things are small things, such as respecting each other's privacy, not visiting without reason, keeping quiet at ordinary times, not disturbing people in the middle of the night, etc. 1 person, 1 tree, thinking in one place, working together to create a harmonious and beautiful shared life. At the same time, in the event of force majeure, such as natural disasters such as wars, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, etc., priority must be given to saving Jaehaerys' life. A certain tree must provide all support within its capabilities and cannot be picked on. Duo Bao Miaoshu. Why don't you just tell me your name? In the end, the two of them recorded some notes on the parchment, and the signature of Jaehaerys Targaryen and the pattern of a leaf suddenly appeared on the signature. Jaehaerys put the parchment away contentedly. Brother, what's the matter? Do you know that a promise is worth 1,000 pieces of gold? Are you doing this because you don't believe in my godhead? Oh, brother, in my day, the spirit of contract was all about the spirit of contract, right? We have to keep pace with the times. Jaehaerys explained patiently. This thing can be managed by gentlemen but not by villains. It's all about minutiae. Things, if he can't abide by this, then he can only think of other means of checks and balances. After the contract was signed, Duo Bao went into seclusion. In this short period of time, his spiritual energy was greatly consumed. Before the retreat, he told Jaehaerys to abide by the provisions of the contract. Don't peep at it if nothing happens, and don't look for it if something happens. When it's really critical, you can save it if you can. If you can't save it, then it depends on fate. The main focus is on randomness. Jaehaerys touched his nose, as if he had offended it, as if he saw a golden thigh walking away. He thought about trying to call the sapling, but he didn't know how to use his spiritual consciousness, and he forgot to ask for advice. Hey, what a great injustice. I am charging for 2-way calls, and the other party is for 1-way calls. I really don't want to suffer any loss at all. Mean. He took out the Jiangsu pill. The core was purple-black. He was a little hesitant. Will it fall off if he eats it? He didn't completely trust the other person. He was full of bad words and acted like a brother to everyone. He didn't look like a good person. Forget it, it's not that there are no ways to become stronger now. Although half of the spiritual energy has to be taken away every day, when I follow the fleet to Dragonstone Island, I will have at least 8 to 9 months to practice slowly. How can I do it at that time? Can build foundation. The division of cultivation realms in Daoist teachings is simple and crude. From low to high, it is to absorb qi to build the foundation, to practice qi to transform into spirit, to practice spirit to return to emptiness. There is no more later. As mentioned before, the more than 10 generations of ancestors of the He family can only cultivate the sense of breathing and successfully build the foundation. The subsequent realms basically remain in the imagination. After so many generations, they have never succeeded in cultivating it, let alone a single grain. The golden elixir is swallowed into my belly, and my fate is up to me. Let's practice qi honestly and strive to build the foundation as soon as possible. Then some spells and talismans will be available for use. Jaehaerys took advantage of the light of the rising sun in the morning and began a day of practice. Time flies like an arrow, and more than half a month has passed in the blink of an eye. During this period, Jaehaerys collected 2 more scarlet pearl pills from the Duobao Miaoshu. Originally, he thought that the other party would secretly steal more spiritual energy, but he found out that the other party was very honest, and half of what he said was true, which made his plan come to nothing. Today is another rent collection day, and Jaehaerys called out silently in his heart. During this period, he asked the other party that spiritual communication can only be used after foundation building, otherwise he would not have to use such low means. He didn't stop until Duobao Miaoshu's response rang in his mind. Old rules, a crimson pearl pill. Brother, the Jiangsu pill is really gone. That's okay, I'll replace it with something else. It's not even half as good as the Jiangsu pill. Jaehaerys had never taken it, so he really didn't care about the Jiangsu pill. Once he heard that it had good things, his eyes started to light up. Brother, do you have any treasures that can open your brother's eyes? Duobao Miaoshu summoned a fruit with great distress. The fruit had green skin and red stems, a bit like a green apple, but there were some inexplicable light patterns flowing on the surface, which seemed quite magical, which made Jaehaerys thought of the apples packaged in delicate gift boxes on Christmas Eve. I'm afraid it's a bit pricey. If it's one compared to Jiangsu Dan, I don't know if it will work. Brother, you are a fruit worm that eats rat bites and tatters your coat. You can't sell it at a high price. Hey, you arrange the incision in the pawn shop for me. Do you know what this is? The Daoist fruit of my Duobao immortal root. Jaehaerys said. Oh, the appearance of this thing looked really ordinary, just a dancing green apple. Do you understand Daoguo, the real fruit of the immortal family? Who are you looking down on with just this expression? The fruit of the fairy family. Flat peach, yellow plum. Jaehaerys's eyes lit up. If he said that, then he was no longer sleepy. Brother, will eating this Daoist fruit make me indestructible and my body become an immortal? No, that's the Dao Ting Laojun's 9 turns golden elixir, which is pretty much the same. Would that allow me to fly into the sky and escape from the earth immediately, soaring through the clouds and mist? Ahem, can you stop thinking about things that you have and don't have? What are you doing all day long? With that kind of effect, this immortal root has already become the ancestral tree of the Daoist court. I really dare to think that I will become an immortal in a flying move. Like eating melon seeds. Counting thousands of years in the Hua family, how many people have ascended physically? Aren't the vast majority of them corpse-exposing immortals? This can't be done, and that can't be done either. Do you still have the nerve to say that you are a fool? HMPH, this Dao fruit can allow you to randomly master a skill. It may be a spell or a magical power. Of course, everything depends on fate. Jaehaerys shook his head. What do you mean by fate? Does it mean Yuan? How come it looks like a certain religion? Am I compassionate, not to save the poor? I too. Duobao Miaoshu felt a burst of contempt in his heart. At this level, he is still cultivating immortality. The educational level of practitioners in the age of silent Dharma was prenatal education, right? To put it bluntly, it depends on probability, do you understand? This is really not a lie. Duobao Daoguo is also known as the immortal realm Guanpu. In the common saying, it is a blind box. With the same appearance, even the immortals cannot guess what kind of secrets are hidden inside. You may learn very practical or powerful spells and magical powers, or you may learn rubbish skills such as postpartum care for sows and 100 ways to cook ducks. Therefore, every time the immortals buy the Duobao Dao fruit, it is really like gambling on stones, and there is also a business of gambling on fruits, to see who buys the Dao fruit with a higher value. But soon the heavenly court strictly prohibited gambling and purified the atmosphere of the immortal world. Then, the Dao fruit that no one cares about cannot be wasted. After all, it has been born through hard work, so the multi-treasure trees were collected one by one and prepared to go to the lower fairyland to sell. However, with the advent of the Age of Silence, the lower fairyland will basically everything collapsed. It has accumulated fruits for thousands of years. It occupies 1/10 of the mustard space. Zhang Zhu Dan, Qing Dao fruit, don't blame me for tricking you, talk about probability, talk about fate, if it can last for a while, it will last for a while. Of course, the Dao fruit it has taken out now is not completely a scam, because even the lowest level Dao fruit contains skills and spells that correspond to the peak of mortals. The same principle, probability theory, whether the whole family is rich or the whole family is rich, you can only know after eating the Dao fruit. What if he prescribes postpartum care for sows, weed eradication technology, etc., at least it will be no problem to become the leading breeding and farming company on the continent. One person and one tree started to debate the value of the Dao fruit again, and finally decided that one Dao fruit would last for 10 days. Both sides felt that they had not lost out. Jaehaerys accepted the Dao fruit and ended the call for today. After the practice was over, Jaehaerys wandered around the Red Castle. He was different from the original owner. The original owner was taught to have the bearing and manners of aristocrats since childhood. But he was used to running all over the mountains and fields since he was a child. During the time when he became a Daoist priest after graduation, what kind of rough man and old bachelor had he not seen? It must be said that because he was friendly and not arrogant, and he was not annoyed when others called him by his nickname, he soon became friends with the guards and servants of the Red Castle. There were even those brave maids and strong women who wanted to trick him into touching pears and looking at cows. He fled in panic. Boys should also be protected these days. While chatting with everyone, he also got a lot of useful information. For example, Grand Maester Pycelle often brought young and beautiful maids or technicians to his room to tutor him in ventriloquism and craftsmanship all night. For another example, although Lord Varys, the chief intelligence officer, had a bald head and an empty bottom, he also had needs. A maid once saw a strange man entering and leaving his room in the middle of the night. What's more exaggerated is that some people said that there were ghosts wandering under the cellar of the Red Castle. He dared to swear to the gods that what he said was true. Jaehaerys, who has watched the TV series, knows that Pycelle is really old but not old at heart. This is a handle. There is no reason why I can't catch him. Isn't that what the little devil does? I will arrange it for him later. Varys is not zero, but he became a ghost under the Red Castle with his superb disguise. In the original plot, Arya once encountered his secret meeting with Illyrio, the governor of Pentos. However, there is another piece of news, which was inquired from the servant of the Grand Maester. It is said that Eddard Stark, the Duke of Winterfell, has led 3,000 northern cavalry to Sow Corner. It has been more than 10 days since Jaehaerys traveled through time. He received the memories of the original owner and had a good understanding of the territories of some royal nobles. Sow Corner is located next to the King's Road. It is the territory of Sir Hogg, a knight with property. It is about 50 leagues, about 240 kilometers, away from King's Landing. The cavalry will rush to King's Landing at full speed tomorrow afternoon. Fortunately, Duke Stark would not be so foolish as to dismount the cavalry and attack the city without building siege equipment. That would not be bravery, but stupidity. Eddard Stark is cautious by nature, completely different from the radical Robert Baratheon. He is not a genius military commander, but mediocre. In the Battle of the Trident half a month ago, the strength of the rebels and the royalists was not very different. Even the 40,000 soldiers led by Crown Prince Rhaegar, although 1/3 of them were newly recruited, and thousands of knights and 10,000 experienced and brave soldiers sent by Dorne, in terms of number, exceeded the 4 coalition forces of Wolf, Deer and Osprey. Rhaegar fought with Robert for a long time. Before being hit in the chest by Robert's iron spike warhammer, the army loyal to the Targaryen family did not show defeat. Robert was also seriously injured after the battle, and the army also needed to rest, replenish food and repair weapons. So before the arrival of the rebel infantry corps, Jaehaerys believed that they would not attack the city, but would be more alert and blockade, cutting off the supply and support of King's Landing from all parts of the king's territory. Jaehaerys had a sense of crisis in his heart. So far, Aerys II had not meant to let the Targaryen women and children retreat, which was fatal. Jaime, dressed in white armor, returned to the White Sword Tower, where he and his sworn brothers lived. Once, 6 Kingsguards, led by Captain Gerald Hightower, swore to be loyal to the Targaryen royal family members until death. They swore not to marry or give land, just to protect the glory of the royal family. Before today, although he knew that the king had a plan to appoint his own Kingsguard, he didn't care. He even knew that if he didn't join the Kingsguard, he would have to leave his dear sister and marry the second daughter of Duke Tully. This made him unbearable. He still remembered the first time with his sister. It was still endless aftertaste, but it was a pity that there were too few gatherings and they had to be sneaky, otherwise he would be beaten to death by his father. Speaking of his father, he received a letter from his father today, which was sent to the Red Castle through an extremely secret channel. In this tense atmosphere, it is absolutely abnormal for his father to secretly send a secret letter. He finished his shift quietly, returned to his room, and with the faint candlelight, he removed the golden seal, and the handwriting of the Duke of Castle Rock appeared on the slightly yellow parchment. The Duke's handwriting is like his personality, tough and strong, like the steep rocks on the seashore of the west that are hid by wind and waves. Jaime read it seriously, and after a moment, his handsome face frowned, his facial muscles were tense, and he said nothing. At the same time, Jaehaerys also returned to his room, pacing back and forth. Building a foundation is not a trivial matter. The notes and insights left by our ancestors all say that a quiet environment should be chosen for building a foundation, and it is best to have someone to protect you. Because building a foundation is the first hurdle that practitioners must overcome. They need to communicate with the heaven and earth with their own weak magic power and obtain the recognition of the heaven and earth. For example, practicing is like building a house. Chi training before building a foundation is like hoarding cement, steel bars and other building materials. At this time, the heaven and earth don't care about you. Building a foundation means starting to lay the foundation. If you don't obtain a building permit or a construction permit, it is illegal construction. A fine is a small matter. A direct bomb destroying the foundation is a complete disaster. Because the cultivator's spirit and body are too fragile during the Chi training stage, all energy must be mobilized to deal with this step of building a foundation. At this time, it is most taboo to disturb, otherwise the Chi and blood will flow backwards, which will damage the Chi channels at the least, and it will be difficult to practice later, and even more difficult, and the Chi Si and Dantian will be broken. Of course, building a foundation only means that the world has recognized your qualifications for cultivation, but it does not mean that the subsequent cultivation will be smooth sailing. After all, building a building requires financial supervision, construction progress inspection, etc., and the world will give tests from time to time. Practitioners call it the 3 disasters and 5 difficulties. Originally, he planned to formally build a foundation in a relatively stable environment after arriving at Dragonstone. But now the enemy is coming too fast, and he is uneasy, afraid that something will happen in the middle. After all, the plot has changed slightly since Jaehaerys was born successfully. There are butterflies spreading their wings, and here the wind is blowing. It is said that a slight difference should be 1,000 miles away. Jaehaerys was panic-stricken. He was clever when he used tiles, fearful when he used hooks, and stupid when he used gold. What about his life? He felt that he could not sit and wait for death. He had thought that Aerys II would send someone to send his wife and children away in advance, but now his life and property were threatened, and he could not put all his hopes on his father to wake up. He did not have the heart to fight for hegemony, but his identity as the second son of the dragon family was here. The usurper Robert Baratheon was not a magnanimous person. In the original plot, it was the Lannisters who helped him solve the wives and children of Aerys and Rhaegar and took the crime of the Kingslayer, but Stannis Baratheon did not catch Viserys and Daenerys who fled to Essos, so he was furious and exiled the latter to Dragonstone. At the beginning of the plot of A Song of Ice and Fire, after he learned that Daenerys had married Khal Drogo of the Dothraki, he immediately convened a royal meeting and bribed assassins to assassinate her, which directly became the fuse for Eddard to fall out with him. Although he decided not to pursue her when he was dying, it was not because of a change of conscience, but to make up for the rift with Eddard Stark and allow his old friend to assist his heir wholeheartedly. Such a person, even when he was dying, did not show mercy, let alone when his troops were sharp, and his strength and power reached their peak. Even if he cherished his feathers, it was hard to guarantee that he would not turn around and drink a cup of poisoned wine. At most, he would push out a scapegoat. Did it affect him? Yes, but not much. He would not care. Jaehaerys thought about all the interests clearly, and only by being strong could he save himself. He took out the red pearl pill with red light patterns from his arms, and planned to follow the steps, but who would have thought that things in the world were not as expected? Yes, cultivation is to fight against the heavens, how can there be no risk? More importantly, Jaehaerys believed that the treasure tree would not harm him for the time being. After all, his death would definitely not benefit it. He pretended to be heroic and swallowed the red pearl pill in one gulp. Ahem, what's this smell? It feels like eating burnt peanuts. The smell was indeed unpleasant, but he just said it. He immediately sat cross-legged and began to refine the pill. Refining the pill is just like dissolving rock sugar with boiling water, except that the boiling water here is one's own internal energy, which dissolves and absorbs the spiritual energy contained in the pill, thereby strengthening the internal energy and consolidating the foundation. Looking inward, Jaehaerys saw that his internal energy was like a stream, eroding the surface of the pill layer by layer, and soon the red pearl pill turned into a pool of red sugar water. The internal energy was like a bandit who saw a woman, and began to call friends. One by one, the light spots rushed into the sugar water, without hesitation and rolled around. When they came out again, they all brought their wives with them, and then the couple returned home together. Jaehaerys could feel that these wives were integrated into his flesh and blood, making his flesh and blood tougher, integrated into the chi channels, making the chi channels wider, and integrated into the internal energy, making the internal energy undergo some changes. He couldn't say what kind of changes, but he could only say that the internal energy seemed to become mature, and willing to take on more responsibilities. Seeing everything develop in a good way, he finally put his mind at ease and began to mobilize his whole body's energy and spirit to communicate with this world with his own magic power. Some people say, why do we have to communicate with the world when we are in the world of A Song of Ice and Fire? This world is not the one on Blue Star, right? In fact, it is not the case. Tao follows nature. No matter where you are in the world, you will have your own way. Otherwise, the world will not be the world, but chaos, and all living things will not be able to reproduce. Building the foundation is to let this world recognize it. Is there any situation that it does not recognize? Of course there is, and there are many. Then how to let the world recognize it? Our ancestors told us that we should always have no desires to observe its wonders. The world is not benevolent and treats all things as straw dogs, so we must eliminate our own desires and disguise ourselves as a tool without emotions. I do whatever God tells me to do, and I am very obedient. God, do you think I am very obedient? Since I am so obedient, I will stay by your side for a while and look at you with admiration. Is it okay? This is called observing its wonders. In contrast, people who think that the sky is the first, the earth is the second, and I am the third in the world will not be recognized in 9 out of 10 cases, unless their luck is amazing and God chases them to feed them. When Jaehaerys brought his spiritual energy and spirit to the Niwen Palace, the Niwen Palace was the fontanelle, which was the skylight of the Upper Dantian and the portal for practitioners to communicate with the heaven and earth. As soon as he arrived at the Niwen, a sound of the great way resounded through his soul, with its majestic momentum, abundant power, profound rhyme, and a sense of mystery surged into his heart. Jaehaerys opened his eyes, and a look of joy flashed unconsciously from the corners of his eyes. The foundation of practice was established. What followed was that every cell in the body was cheering and rejoicing. A stream of internal energy flowed through the gaps between cells, pushing out the blocked things in the body through 36,000 pores. In an instant, Jaehaerys felt a sense of relief. When he originally took in the air, the stagnant and obscure feeling was swept away. The legend that building a foundation can cleanse the hair and marrow is true. The changes in the body did not end there. A sense of hunger came from every corner of the body. Jaehaerys did not get up. He took in the spirit of the air in big mouthfuls, but it was still not enough. The spiritual energy in the air was too thin to meet his current needs, so he had no choice but to take out the remaining 2 crimson pearl pills and a Dao fruit from his pocket. He had not noticed anything unusual about these spiritual objects before, but after building his foundation, his sensitivity to spiritual energy had reached a higher level, and he could clearly see that their surfaces were slowly emitting faint spiritual energy. He was worried. If the spiritual energy continued to flow like this, wouldn't the spiritual objects become ordinary things in a few decades? In fact, he didn't know that all spiritual objects had this problem, but the cultivation world had its own ways to reduce or even cut off the loss of spiritual energy, such as the blood and chi seal he had used before. But he didn't know at this time. After all, there was no profound cultivation inheritance, so he thought that the spiritual energy was always flowing, so he might as well eat it now to replenish the spiritual energy. Waste is not a good habit. So he pinched out another crimson pearl pill, looked at it, felt that it was not enough, and cast his eyes on the Dao fruit. The spiritual power of this green apple is much more abundant than that of the crimson pearl pill. Don't you want to try it? Jaehaerys was very active, especially when eating, so he ate the Dao fruit in 2 or 3 bites, not to mention that the taste is not exactly the same as that of the green apple, it can only be said to be exactly the same. A burst of abundant spiritual power burst out in the body. Jaehaerys quickly gathered his mind and began a new round of refining. Who can build a 9-story platform without piling up soil, and build a foundation that imitates the towering peaks, and make the 10,000 peaks look weak? Cultivation does not know the years, and thousands of years have passed in the blink of an eye. When you are immersed in spiritual practice, time always passes quickly, and spiritual practice is addictive. This addiction is greater than addiction to tobacco and alcohol. Once you experience it, you cannot extricate yourself. Most of the day passed in the blink of an eye. The sky outside the window was getting dark, and a strong woman knocked on the door and called out. Jaehaerys opened his eyes, and silhouettes of figures dancing with swords flashed across his misty irises, and then disappeared without a trace in the blink of an eye. He murmured to himself, Ape Man's sword technique. The duo Bao Miaoshu did not lie to him. This Dao fruit was indeed magical. With just one Dao fruit, he instantly learned a profound sword technique, Monkey King sword technique. The Monkey King, also known as the White Monkey King, is said to be an old ape who attained Daoism in the mountains during the spring and autumn period and the Warring States period. His swordsmanship was extraordinary, and he once competed with Yu Nu in swordsmanship. Although he was taught to be a human ape, Yu Nu was such a fairy figure that she was single. A single sword can defeat hundreds of warriors. Although the old ape was defeated by the Yu girl, he managed to escape with his whole body. He can be said to be a master of swordsmanship. Yanggong sword technique has a total of 24 moves, which simplify the complex and have profound meaning. The sword technique is refined and there are no false moves. They are all practical moves. At this moment, Jaehaerys already knew the swordsmanship of the Monkey King by heart. He only lacked actual combat experience in various moves, so he could not master them. To put it bluntly, it is one thing to have exquisite swordsmanship, but whether it can be used in actual combat, or whether it can be used in actual combat. It's another thing to stabilize your mentality and exert your due strength. Veterans of hundreds of battles may not have the most elegant swordsmanship or knife skills, but they can kill the enemy with life-saving skills on the battlefield. Shungguodanzi, who usually excels in swordsmanship, has a hard time whether he can bring out the essence of his swordsmanship on the battlefield. This kind of thing can only be said to be commonplace, both at home and abroad, in ancient and modern times. The strong woman knocking on the door became more and more urgent, which made Jaehaerys come back to his senses. At this time, his body was covered with dirt, sticky and uncomfortable, and his whole body seemed to have crawled out of mud, but the smell was not bad and he was not choking. People. In this era, ordinary people only bathe a few times in their lives, and lice are everywhere on their heads and bodies. Even children from noble families who practice martial arts every day cannot bathe every day, so Jaehaerys' current image is not out of the ordinary. So he changed his clothes casually and opened the door. Oh, by the gods, Your Highness, did you fall into the mud pit? The strong woman covered her mouth and laughed, her swollen eyes couldn't stop looking at her. Hey, don't mention it, Mahi, you were really unlucky. Jaehaerys spread his hands. Everyone knew that he liked to run around. It was normal for him to get mud and dust on his body. He followed the strong woman's words. The two walked while talking. Mahi came to call him to have dinner. It was said that the king invited some important officials to dinner tonight, so the queen and princes had to attend. Soon the two of them arrived at the restaurant, where they saw silver candlesticks inserted on the walls, and even the huge long dining table was dotted with candlesticks, illuminating the hall brightly. Sitting on the main seat is an old man with a thin and haggard face. His tangled silver hair is longer than his shoulders, and his fingernails are a foot long. He looks like the old Montenegro demon in Journey to the West. He wears a huge and exquisite crown with dragon patterns on his head. Wearing a black velvet robe, but the gorgeous clothes can't improve his decadent temperament. Queen Layla and Prince Viserys sat on his right side. A pink and tender little girl sat between Viserys and Queen Layla. She had long platinum hair and was whispering to Queen Layla. As she spoke, a black kitten walked back and forth under her seat, wagging its small black tail and looking up at her. There was also a set of tableware placed next to Viserys, a silver plate with a knife, fork and spoon, and a gold goblet inlaid with red garnets on the right side of the plate. To the left of the king, sat a man wearing a brown cloth hat, a greasy-headed man, and a handsome young man with long silver hair. Jaehaerys didn't recognize them, but based on Mahi's description, they should be pyromancer Roset, intelligence chief Varys, and Sea Lord Leatherys Velaryon. They are all important ministers, but few are good people. Rossart only wanted to restore the honor of the alchemists. He regarded human life as trivial and continuously provided wildfire to Aerys too. He was simply aiding the evil. Varys is a cunning and insidious person. He has no honor or shame, and betrayal is commonplace for him. Lucullus is a flatterer, jealous of talents, and has a handsome body, but in fact he is an out-and-out idiot. If the Velaryon family is not in charge of the royal fleet, where will the Sea Lord take his turn? Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Jaehaerys walked into the hall and saluted his father and ministers. The etiquette was complete. Anyone who saw him would think that he was a handsome young man. Except for his dirty face and exposed neck, Jaehaerys walked into the hall. Outside. What a show of pretense. Viserys was disdainful in his heart. A real nobleman does not make up the numbers through superficial etiquette, but strong force, handsome and fair face, elegant and generous conversation. In short, he has an outstanding demeanor. Like a beggar. Jaehaerys didn't care what others thought. The end of his dynasty was imminent, so he was still pretending to be a fool. If it weren't for his future plans, he wouldn't have planned to come today. Who said the royal family had to be there? Aegon and his mother Princess Elia didn't come. After everyone arrived, Queen Layla asked people to arrange the food. Even though prices in King's Landing were soaring now, the king still couldn't slack off at the banquet. There were 2 roast suckling pigs on huge wooden plates, roast beef and lamb chops coated with honey, venison cooked with carrots and barley, roasted bison legs with leeks, spiced duck, wild boar with pepper, roast goose, roasted chicken skewers and pigeon skewers, and desserts included honey cake, pears cooked in strong wine, berry pie and blueberry biscuits. The drinks were also quite rich, including sweet red wine from the Arbor, summer red wine from Dornay, white wine from Lee, pear brandy from Tiroche, barley beer and other kinds of wine that Jaehaerys didn't recognize. It can be seen that the king attaches great importance to his banquet, but for some reason he didn't invite the Prime Minister, the Minister of Justice and the Grand Maester. With the king's toast, the sumptuous dinner officially began. During the banquet, people toasted each other, and after 3 rounds of wine and 5 kinds of dishes, everyone's face was greasy. Jaehaerys also ate heartily. It was the first time he had tasted the delicious food in this world after coming here for so long. Although it was not as good as the food on Blue Star, it was meat after all. He has not tasted meat for, well, half a month. After building his foundation, although his body is still thin, he has the strength of an adult man, and his appetite has increased accordingly, so he doesn't care about the surprised eyes of others. After finishing a roast goose, he picked up the pig's head and ate it, wanting to show off to everyone that he ate a pig in 3 bites. Lanolin wine is tulip-colored, and the jade bowl is filled with amber light. The jade dishes are busy, and the stomach and intestines are not disappointed. Chapter 11. My lords, Aerys too saw that the atmosphere had arrived. 3 of the lords were 70% drunk, and some of them were even more unruly. They frequently measured the size and smoothness of the palace maids with their hands. He spoke immediately. In an instant, everyone sobered up. Varys had clear eyes, bowed forward, and looked respectful. Lord Valyrian was reluctant to leave, so he put his finger on his nose and sniffed, and then gradually returned to normal. Roset was the worst. He was old and ugly, and his drunken state was annoying. Everyone knows that my son Rhaegar, the heir to the Iron Throne, has died in battle, and I am old. The state is in danger. If something unexpected happens, the heir must be determined in advance. Everyone who came here today is someone I trust very much. Please speak freely. The king dismissed those who were irrelevant, and then released a heavy bomb, like a huge rock thrown on the calm water. The important ministers looked at each other. Your Majesty, I think there is no room for negotiation on the issue of the heir, Varys said first. With his understanding of the king, he must be dissatisfied with Aegon, the son of Rhaegar, inheriting the Iron Throne. As a king, he can designate an heir and also has the right to depose the heir. After the death of Crown Prince Rhaegar in battle, the Iron Throne should be inherited by His Royal Highness Prince Aegon. Of course, you are the king, and your will is above all else. As the king's advisor, Roset has always followed the king's footsteps. The wildfire that the king used to burn people was provided by this guy, and he never gets tired of it, and is happy to show the power of the Alchemist Guild in front of everyone. Your Majesty, Prince Aegon is too young and weak. The current state of affairs is precarious, and a wise lord should be chosen. Lucerys and Rhaegar don't get along. Although most of the time he just speculates on the Mad King's thoughts, it is hard to say that there is no bad feeling after years of rifts. It's not easy to wait until Rhaegar dies, and his son takes the throne. What if he causes trouble for me in the future? Jaehaerys didn't care. Anyway, the throne would never come to him. Besides, with cultivation, he didn't pursue worldly power so much. How to say it, the pleasure of cultivation is more exciting than power. How many kings and generals have become dead bones after thousands of years? How can it compare to the freedom of eternal youth and longevity? There is a saying, you can be as good as a god without being a fairy in heaven. You can taste all the sufferings in the world, but it's just two tails of money. At first glance, this is right and seems quite philosophical, but people are not only troubled and miserable because of money, but also oppression, bullying, coercion, love and hate separation, and can't get what they want. The sufferings of life are far more than lack of money. The king held his chin. He felt more and more tired recently. Since Rhaegar died in battle, he realized that he had already become old and frail. The original suspicion, doubt, and jealousy of Rhaegar were just resentment for his own aging. When he understood this, the pain in his heart was like an ant gnawing at his few remaining sanities, making him almost crazy. Listening to the chaotic voices below, he felt a headache. Now is a critical moment. In the first few years of his rule, he was also a wise monarch and could still see the situation clearly. At present, the Lords of the Reach led 30,000 troops to besiege Storm's End, and there were 200 warships of the Redwyn family on the sea to block the sea, but they were slow to come to support King's Landing. How many troops can a Storm's End have now? At most, there are only a few hundred people. Even if Mace Tyrell is a fool, Lord Randall Tarly has been in the army for a long time. Can he not understand that leaving a small number of troops to contain and a large army to rescue King's Landing? It can be seen that they are not stupid, but bad. Watching Rhaegar lead a hasty army to fight against the traitors who are ready for battle. Watching King's Landing is about to be besieged. They should all be burned to death. Varys had informed during the day that the cavalry of the north had already arrived at Sow Corner, and the vanguard commander was Roose Bolton, the Earl of the Dreadfort, not Eddard Stark as rumored. Eddard Stark led the powerful troops of the Riverlands, the North and the Stormlands, and slowly advanced from behind. The two armies were only a day's ride apart, and they could reach each other in a flash. In fact, even if the two armies were disconnected, King's Landing had no army to intersperse between them. The army of King's Landing only had 100 knights and 3,000 infantry. If civilians, merchants and rogues were forcibly recruited, the number of infantry could probably double, but for King's Landing, it was still a drop in the bucket. Since its construction, King's Landing has been mainly positioned as a market town and capital, not a military fortress. It was just the foothold for Aegon the Conqueror to land on the continent of Westeros, and gradually formed a residence. The terrain is relatively flat, and the only 3 hills are not steep. After the conquest, Targaryen had dragons, and at the peak, there were more than 10 dragons. Who dared to touch the reverse scale? So the walls of King's Landing are not tall, at least not as tall and thick as Storm's End and Castle Rock. Secondly, it has too many gates, 7 gates, which means 7 key defense areas. More defense means that the power is dispersed. The wall with a circumference of about 10 miles also needs to be guarded. Even if there is a soldier every 10 meters, it will take 16,000 soldiers to defend the wall. King Aerys is ready to give up the outer city of King's Landing. He asked Rosit to lead the wise men of the Alchemist Guild to bury wildfires in various places in King's Landing in advance. Once there is a discord, the wildfire will be ignited directly, and the outer city and the traitors will be burned. By then, the power of the wildfire will surely scare the lords with ill intentions, and the Red Castle will still stand, and the Targaryen family will still be able to sit firmly on the Iron Throne. The king's idea was good, but he had suffered the loss of a desperate bet. There was no doubt that the wildfires would turn King's Landing into rubble, but the rebels were not dead things like houses and castles. They could not wait for the wildfires to burn in front of them and run away. So he had to pave the way for the Targaryen family, determine the heir to the Iron Throne, and send the family members out of King's Landing. Even the poor people in Flea Bottom knew that eggs should not be put in the same basket, and His Majesty the King certainly would not put all the Targaryen family members on the powder keg of King's Landing. He could die, but the bloodline of the Dragon King could not be cut off. At present, the 3 important ministers in front of the king were the ones he trusted and relied on the most, so he wanted to listen to their opinions, but unfortunately, the husband had his own reasons, and the wife had her own reasons, and finally they merged into one sentence, allowing him to make the final decision. I wasted a big meal. The king was angry, but he had no good solution. At this time, he noticed that Jaehaerys was eating and he became interested instantly. In this environment, he was still calm in the face of danger. At least he had a strong psychological quality. Jaehaerys, what do you think? The king said. What do you mean I think? Of course I sit and watch. Jaehaerys complained in his heart, you guys discuss yours, I eat mine, isn't it good not to interfere with each other? The enemy is at the gates of the city and the war clouds are urging, people's hearts are not in favor of the world, the change of dynasties is common, who is the master of the ups and downs of the country? Of course, I can complain in my heart, but I can't say it out loud. The person in the head is the king and father of my body. Since he asked, who else can understand the general direction of the plot but me? Ahem, get out of the way, I want to install AC. Father, I think little Aegon is the real dragon, for 3 reasons. First, my brother Rhaegar is the legal heir to the Iron Throne, and his offspring should be the legal heir. Moreover, he died fighting for the country. If little Aegon's inheritance rights are deprived at this critical moment, it will push those who sympathize with him and love him to the rebellion. Second, according to the precedent set by the Great Council in 101, women and their offspring cannot inherit the Iron Throne, so Rhaenys cannot inherit the Iron Throne. Apart from her, only Aegon, Viserys and I have the right to inherit, and Aegon is the first in line, his rights are unquestionable. Third, as for Viserys and I, we all know that our wisdom and strategy are only average, far from being wise, so I think Aegon is the best candidate for succession. After all, he is more malleable, isn't he? Viserys was so angry, you are only average. You have no hope of sitting on the Iron Throne, but you insist on pulling me down, a beardless thief, a white-haired man. I have never seen such a shameless person. But Jaehaerys's words made the king, the queen and the 3 important ministers nod their heads secretly. They didn't know the modesty in Jaehaerys' tone, but just thought that Jaehaerys had a full understanding of themselves and the twin brothers. After all, the performance of the 2 brothers in the past was really hard to raise expectations. Okay, Jaehaerys is right, then let's decide it. The king stopped Luthras from talking and decided it. Varys glanced at Jaehaerys with his half-smiley eyes, with a smile on his lips forever. After the issue of the heir was determined, the banquet was almost over. When the king asked several children to leave early, he kept several important ministers to discuss the matter. Rhaenys followed Queen Layla, holding the little black cat Valyrian in her arms, and disappeared happily in front of her. Viserys's face flushed. his fists clenched, and he wanted to make trouble for Jaehaerys, but when Jaehaerys looked at him, he was instantly dominated by the fear of the previous ravages. His face turned pale and he was embarrassed. Just when he wanted to explain, Jaehaerys had already walked away. He silently swore in his heart that he must learn martial arts from Master William from tomorrow. As long as he defeated Jaehaerys, he would dare to be arrogant. Jaehaerys was waiting outside the hall, waiting for the 3 adults to come out. After about an hour, the 3 ministers came out one after another, and their steps were no longer drunk. He saw the direction where the fire wizard Roset left and chased him. "Lord Roset, please stay." Roset was a stubborn old man. Like most of the wise men of the Alchemist Guild, he struggled all his life to restore the glory of the Alchemist Guild. Unfortunately, none of the alchemy, magic, and mystical arts they claimed worked. The only role of the pyromancers now is to provide wildfire, and wildfire is Jaehaerys' goal. At the beginning of the journey, Jaehaerys thought about whether to invent gunpowder. He knew the formula of black gunpowder: 1 saltpeter, 2 sulfur, 3 charcoal, and had experimented several times, but he didn't know whether it was not pure enough or due to operational errors. The black gunpowder he made had no explosive power at all, more like an accelerant. Okay, he admitted that he really didn't know how to purify saltpeter and sulfur. After all, these things were basically only used by chemical companies before he traveled through time, and ordinary people couldn't touch them at all. So, let's settle for the second best. After all, the power of wildfire is much stronger than his half-baked, black gunpowder. It has the advantages of low ignition point, burning when colliding, and burning on steel and water. Although it is not very stable, as long as this point is solved, it will be very useful. Anyway, after leaving King's Landing, Dragonstone will face another war. In the era when dragons don't come out, what water war weapon is more powerful than wildfire? I believe that the burned Stannis warships in the Battle of the Blackwater River have the most say. Jaehaerys is determined to obtain the technology for making wildfires. As the chief alchemist, Roset's wildfire-making technology is not to be underestimated. It is said that the amount of wildfire he made alone is 1/3 of the entire Alchemist Guild. What a respectable magic researcher. Roset is old, and he has drunk a lot of wine, so his hearing is a little bit bad. It was not until Jaehaerys came a few steps behind him that he realized that someone was following him. He stopped and slowly turned around with his crutches. "Are you Viserys, His Highness Jaehaerys?" Roset couldn't tell the twins apart before, but at the banquet tonight, Jaehaerys' calm and approachable temperament made it easy for him to distinguish him from his twin brothers. It's not that Viserys is not good, but he has a common problem of aristocratic arrogance and frivolity, which makes it difficult for the old warlock, who was born a commoner, to show respect from the heart. In comparison, he prefers down-to-earth nobles like Jaehaerys. Unfortunately, he is not his brother, otherwise he would have recommended Jaehaerys to be the heir to the Iron Throne tonight. Thinking of this, he looked at Jaehaerys with a hint of sympathy and regret. "But what does your majesty want?" "My lord, you misunderstood," Jaehaerys explained. He thought about how to organize his words. After all, he wanted to collect treasures from the Alchemist Guild, and he was more or less embarrassed to speak. "You are the most powerful person in the entire 7 kingdoms. A wise man of knowledge, my admiration for you is like an endless stream of black water. When I see you today, I suddenly feel that it is too late to meet you." A rainbow fart, trying to lower the old man's alertness, but for the old man, who has never seen anyone in this life, and those who treat others with courtesy must ask for something. He may not be able to say this, but the truths are connected. "Your Highness, what do you want? Let me guess. Do you want wildfire?" Jaehaerys was a little stunned. "Did I show it so obviously?" "Your Highness, this substance is extremely dangerous. Your ancestor, His Majesty Aegon V, was buried under this substance, and even further, Prince Aerion Targaryen. For a child like you, said, excessive curiosity may bring great danger." Quote. Roset understood that playing with fire was a hobby engraved in the Targaryen bones. Former heiress, old King Jaehaerys and Aegon V all showed great interest in wildfire when they were young. So right now Prince Jaehaerys is behaving normally. "Sir, you misunderstood. I want the technology to make wildfire." Jaehaerys did not hide it. The worst he could do was to be rejected. Roset was not the only one in the alchemist guild who could make wildfire. Can you tell me why His Highness wants its production technology? A trace of doubt flashed in Rosat's turbid eyes. Except for the red-robed monks from Esso's continent who visited the alchemist guild a long time ago and learned apart from some superficial information, this substance has been strictly kept secret by the alchemist guild for thousands of years. The outside world only knows that such a thing exists, but little is known about its performance. My lord, do you think King's Landing can be defended this time? Jaehaerys asked rhetorically without answering. Of course. Roset hesitated for a moment, then spoke. Jaehaerys rolled his eyes secretly. Would his conscience really not hurt if he lied to the child with this? If he was really confident of keeping King's Landing, why would the Mad King let the Alchemist Guild plant wildfires all over King's Landing? Are you just planning to drag the whole city to death? He is simply worse than a beast. Was it my father who gave the order? Saints talk about their deeds but not their hearts. Isn't this yet put into practice? It's not that Jaehaerys didn't know how to distinguish between right and wrong after traveling through time, and he helped his relatives and not others. He came to Rossiter firstly to obtain wildfire-making technology, and secondly to stop Aerys II's plan to burn the city. There are several advantages to doing this. First, it ensures the advancement of one's own combat readiness. If Stannis had wildfires back then, it would be unclear whether King's Landing could hold out until Tywin and the princes of the Reach came to rescue him during the Battle of the Blackwater. The second is to save the image of the Targaryen family in the hearts of the world, especially the nobles. The main reason why Mother Dragon was betrayed by Tyrion and Jon Snow in the plot was because of their selfishness, but everyone is afraid of Mother Dragon. Inheriting the crazy gene from the Mad King's bloodline is also part of the reason. The third is not to increase the reputation of Jaime and the Lannister family. Originally, as a regicide, Jaime would inevitably wear black clothes even if he was not executed. However, he was pardoned by Robert and continued to be his Kingsguard. Isn't the important reason that he killed the Fire Warlocks and saved the entire King's Landing? My lord, I believe that King's Landing will definitely fall. Jaehaerys said resolutely, his tone as firm as if he had witnessed it with his own eyes. You should know that some of us Targaryens can foresee the future in their sleep. The most famous one is. Jaehaerys thanked this for a magical world. Dreamwalker Deneth Targaryen, the old man shouted. Yes, it was she who foresaw the doomsday catastrophe of Valyria Free Fortress, which prompted my ancestors to bring dragons to Dragonstone. And I also have the ability to foresee the future. Jaehaerys said, although he hasn't really had a dragon dream, but that doesn't stop him from using tiger skin as a banner. What's more important is that the old man opposite him firmly believes in magic. Your Highness, can you tell me what you dreamed about? Roset would not accept his casual remarks. He had to provide substantial evidence before speaking. I dreamed that the golden wave flooded the entire King's Landing. I dreamed that my father said that King's Landing would be charred with blackened bones and roasted flesh and blood. I dreamed that he fell in a pool of blood, and a golden sword cut his throat. Don't make it too obvious. Most of the prophecies are obscure and difficult to understand. There is no sense of mystery and it is easy for people to question them. Then why didn't you tell His Majesty? He is your father. Roset was shocked by his dream. As long as he had foreseen it, it could have been avoided, right? Sir, my father is suspicious. Even if I say it, he may not believe it. Instead, he may blame me and punish me for it. I don't dare, Jaehaerys said in the pitiful voice of a 7-year-old boy. How could a child who was afraid of his father tell the truth to the former? Rossart expressed his understanding. If he had such a father, he would most likely not dare to reveal his true feelings. Thinking of this, he had already given up his doubts. Your Highness, I can teach you how to create wildfire, but you must swear to the gods not to reveal anything, even to the closest people, such as parents, brothers, wives and children. Okay, I swear in the name of the gods and the sky that I will never leak it, otherwise wildfire will burn my body and my soul will not rest in peace. Jaehaerys swore a poisonous oath in accordance with Rosat's request. He had no intention of leaking it anyway. Go out, after all, wildfire is just a transitional product for him to ensure the development of his wretchedness. When he improves his cultivation, he can go anywhere in the world. Don't ask why, asking is a sign of confidence. Rossart saw that it was getting late, so he asked Jaehaerys to find him early the next morning. After saying this, he slowly walked out of the Red Keep. With the help of the attendants outside the door, he got on the carriage and descended from Aegon's hill. Early the next morning, Jaehaerys rarely did his morning duties. Before dawn, he quietly set out from the north gate of the Red Keep with 2 guards and walked straight along the avenue to the Alchemist Guild on the Street of Silent Sisters. When we arrived, the Alchemists' Guild Hall was a large building made of cold black stone, with burning green flames carved on the door. It was used as a place to store dangerous wildfires. It was heavily guarded, and the defensive golden robes saw it. People subconsciously block them, and let them go immediately after seeing the person clearly. Don't make any noise. Jaehaerys put on his hood and whispered as he passed by the golden robe. Then he walked into the dim hall and saw Roset and 2 other pyromancers waiting in the hall. Your Highness, this kind of substance requires mysterious magic to be produced. Oh, please forgive me for forgetting to introduce you to these 2 wise men, Gogosi and Baileys. 2 adults, it's a pleasure to meet you. Jaehaerys saluted. Gogosi was a middle-aged man with black curly hair, and Baileys looked older than Roset, and his trembling appearance made one doubts that a gust of wind can knock him down. Roset then invited Jaehaerys to follow him to the wildfire workshop. Because the workshop is deep underground, it must pass through a dark and deep downward passage. The stone walls are damp and the surroundings are cold. Jaehaerys has already established his foundation, so his resistance to cold and heat is stronger than that of ordinary people, so he didn't feel cold, but he kept going down, which made him feel like he was going deep into a tomb. My lord, how many people in the guild can make this kind of material now? Jaehaerys asked casually. Not many, only 3 of us wise men can make it skillfully, and some assistants are also learning with us, but their attainments and spells need to be improved. This spell is very subtle and cumbersome, but it is indispensable. Roset was helpless about this. The magic between heaven and earth seemed to have disappeared, resulting in the decline of fire magicians. Is that so? Jaehaerys thought. Of course he knew why magic disappeared. Maybe it didn't disappear, but it just became less noticeable. If when the dragon was alive, magic was fireflies at night, which were easy to capture, then now these fireflies have become bats in the dark night. Some people can sense them, but can no longer catch them. After walking down for about 5 minutes, he saw stone houses underground. Faint lights leaked from the cracks in the doors, like white sand under the dreamy moonlight. Roset entered his room. When he came out, he held a scroll in his hand. Your Highness, this is a scroll on the production technology. You should study it here. I will make this material later, and you can watch from the side. Jaehaerys certainly didn't want to miss the opportunity to observe the scene, so he read the scroll at a glance. The spell for making wildfire has hundreds of syllables, which are difficult to pronounce. After reading it silently, he read it out with Roset's encouraging eyes. Roset corrected the mistakes and pointed out when to recite the spell. After reading it completely and correctly, Jaehaerys suddenly found that there was indeed a scorching spiritual power gathering in the air. It was different from the spiritual energy that could be inhaled into the body. It was violent and ferocious, like a wild beast, and could not be touched. There is something, Jaehaerys thought to himself. Roset didn't seem to sense anything unusual, but he was amazed at how quickly Jaehaerys could learn the spell. If the assistants and apprentices in the guild could be like Jaehaerys, why worry that the guild could not be carried forward? Talents are hard to come by. Sometimes it is hard to find a famous teacher, but it is also hard for a famous teacher to find a good one. Especially for this era, just learning to read and write has already blocked most people from the door. The old warlock was excited to see the prey, so he taught more attentively. One was willing to learn, and the other taught attentively. In just one morning, Jaehaerys had already learned spells and carved magic circles. The speed was so fast that the old warlock once doubted his life. At first, he bragged about his learning progress when he was young, but soon he couldn't brag anymore. How to brag about this? For example, if Jaehaerys's learning speed is like a dragon soaring, he was just a turtle crawling back then. This is not a dimension anymore. The old warlock suspected that Jaehaerys had been favored by the Lord of Light, otherwise it would be impossible to explain his ability to understand fire spells at once, draw inferences from one example, and even put forward suggestions for improvement. Just in the carving of the magic circle, he put forward 3 suggestions for modification. Rossett originally thought he was talking nonsense, but when he tried the improvements made by Jaehaerys, he unexpectedly felt it was very smooth. The touch from the tip of the knife was like the top-grade silk from the free trade city flowing through his fingertips, so smooth. Without actual practice, he already knew that Jaehaerys's improvements were correct. This boy's talent in fire magic is so terrifying. Jaehaerys didn't know what the old man was thinking, and even if he knew, he would sneer slightly, saying that he was just skilled. When I was learning to draw talismans from my father, I suffered a lot of beatings from my strict father. Daoist talismans look like ghost paintings to outsiders at first glance, but in the eyes of experts, a real talisman must include the talisman head, main talisman god, talisman belly, talisman foot, and talisman gallbladder, none of which can be missing. Among them, the brushwork of drawing talismans is divided into 2 methods, straight and curved. The most typical curved brushwork is shown in the wonderful Sutra of Cloud Seal to Save People. Outsiders look at it like a heavenly book and don't understand it. The straight method emphasizes the straightness and squareness of the lines, the solemnity and authority, and the continuous flow from the beginning to the end, so the difficulty can be imagined. In addition, after building the foundation, his understanding of spiritual energy can make him detect the sluggishness of the spiritual power in the magic circle at a glance, so it is really easy to grasp. After all, compared with the talisman, the effect of this magic circle on communicating spiritual power can only be said to be entry-level. Rossett had a hunch that the opportunity for the Alchemist Guild to flourish lies in the young prince in front of him, so he took Jaehaerys to the workshop more eagerly. The workshop is adjacent to the room of the fire wizards, but the interval is larger, and oil barrels, sand and cans can be seen everywhere. The raw materials of wildfire are very expensive, which is also the reason why the output has not been high. We need fish oil and some minerals, the old man explained. Jaehaerys saw that the semi-solid grease in the oil barrel exuded a fishy smell, which was fish oil compared to these. The jar contained an off-white waxy substance that gave off a pungent smell. Your Highness, that mineral, we call it chrysoprase, is one of the most important raw materials for making this substance. But please be careful, it is poisonous and burns so easily that we have to put it in a jar and seal it. As a liberal arts student, Jaehaerys did not know much about the minerals and chemicals on Earth, let alone the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. Oh, it was really embarrassing for the time traveler. Next, Rossett showed him how to make wildfire, taking out an appropriate amount of chrysoprase, carefully pounding it into powder with a wooden pestle, then adding semi-solidified fish oil and stirring evenly. Put the mixture in a rough fruit-shaped pottery jar, then put the pottery jar on the magic circle that had been carved in advance, and began to chant the spell. Jaehaerys carefully observed each step, while releasing his spiritual sense to detect the changes in the aura. That's right, since he established his foundation, he has been able to sense the divine consciousness, and now he can roughly project it outward to sense objects within a range of about 3 meters from his body. Under the gaze of the divine consciousness, the space he was in was like being turned into infrared mode. The red, violent spiritual power slowly became controllable under the interaction of magic circles and spells, and slowly merged into the mixture of fish oil and minerals. The fish oil and mineral powder gradually melted, and finally formed a liquid that flashed green light, which looked like melted mung bean smoothie. After Jaehaerys went through it once, he had a clear understanding of the whole process, so with Rossett's consent, he began to try to make wildfire. As for the proportions between the raw materials, he strictly followed the proportions of the old warlock. After all, he was a professional. The steps to make wildfire are not very complicated, and it is no different from the chemistry experiment in junior high school in the previous life. The difference is that here you need to handle the raw materials yourself, which greatly increases the difficulty and time of production. But for Jaehaerys, is this a problem? Soon he completed a can of wildfire independently. Even though the old warlock was mentally prepared, his progress was still amazing. The old warlock also told him the spell to suppress the explosion and out of control of wildfire. It is one of the means to prevent wildfire from accidentally spreading naturally during storage. Then there is the question of how to preserve the finished wildfire. The old warlock taught him everything he knew. When Jaehaerys followed the guards to leave the guild hall and return to the Red Castle, a young man in assistant clothes came over and whispered something to the old warlock. The old warlock waved his hand and said that there was no need to care about the details. If King's Landing fell, the alchemists must also leave a seed. It was pitch black underground, and the sense of the passage of time was relatively weakened. Coming out of the alchemists' guild, Jaehaerys discovered that the sun was at its zenith, and there were few pedestrians on the road. They all looked hurried and poorly dressed. Occasionally, a few carriages inlaid with family emblems passed by, heading towards the Great Sept of Baelor at the other end of the intersection. On the way back to the Red Castle, there was no danger. Only some people who were as thin as dead wood stopped begging. After being scolded by the guards, they realized that the people they stopped were not good people, so they all dispersed. During the war, due to the shortage of food and warm clothes, the prices in King's Landing soared. Ordinary people could not even eat moldy bread mixed with tree bark and grain husk. Flea Bottom still had brown soup supply, but the supply was decreasing day by day, and the supply time was greatly shortened. With a population of 500,000, King's Landing is the most densely populated city in the entire Westeros continent. Of course, this 500,000 population also includes farmers, fishermen, etc. in the surrounding villages and towns. The actual population living in King's Landing is far less than that. Thanks to the fact that people in this era are generally not well educated, only the gods know the specific population in the city. Even if King's Landing has a population of 200,000, with the current backward agricultural production capacity, it is a big burden to support such a large number in peacetime, let alone during war. Once the war breaks out, the chaos in King's Landing is foreseeable and inevitable, but it seems that the ministers have never worried about this, and they are confused, as if they can be regarded as non-existent as long as they can't see it. But those neglected and forgotten populations also need food. They can't rely on tree roots and mice to survive the long siege. Once they are hungry, they will no longer care about any beliefs, ethics, and laws, and will attack small merchants and wealthy merchants unscrupulously, and then kill wealthy merchants, small nobles and lords, and then attack the Red Castle. They will eat everything they can eat on the way like marching ants. Jaehaerys has never experienced the feeling of hunger in his 2 lives, but his parents have described the scenes of their hunger when they were young, and have also seen the scenes in film and television dramas. Many people who meet in the daytime are ghosts, and ghosts at dusk are suspicious of people. Hibiscus texture is fragrant when cooked, and people compete to taste wontons made of milk. In TV series, there are few descriptions of the lives of ordinary people, but more of grand narratives and power struggles between nobles. But there is more to real life than that. The common people cannot come to the fore, but if someone can really mobilize and seduce them, they will become a force that subverts all rule. For example, during the Dance of the Dragons, the people of King's Landing rushed into the dragon's lair and killed 4 dragons. Another example is that during the War of the 5 Kings, the King's Landing riot killed the Archbishop and 2 Kingsguards. So Jaehaerys went out this time, low-key but also dangerous. If he was noticed by someone with ulterior motives, the consequences would be disastrous. Back in the room of the Red Castle, he immediately closed the doors and windows, drew the curtains, and carefully took out a small jar from under his cloak. Inside was a mixture of green amphibole and fish oil. The fish oil had melted a little after leaving the damp and cold environment underground. Through the pottery jar, Jaehaerys seemed to feel the heat gathering. He did not dare to delay and immediately put the idea in his mind into practice. When he was in the basement of the guild hall, he had a vague feeling that the substance of wildfire was endowed with fluidity and sustainability by fish oil, with a low ignition point by green amphibole, and with violent burning by fire spirit power. The magic array combined the 3 elements, like a frame to frame the 3 elements. None of the 4 elements can be missing, but their stability cannot be guaranteed. In this case, can the violent fire spirit power be turned into a neutral and peaceful aura of one's own? Or can the magic array be improved to make the frame more solid? Thinking of this, he secretly took away some raw materials and prepared to come to his room for experiments. The fireplace was large, and the firewood inside had gone out. Moreover, he did not steal much material, so to a certain extent, even if it was burned, it would not last long. The magic array can be improved, but this will take a lot of time, or his cultivation will be further improved, and he will have a deeper understanding of the original power of this world. So for the time being, let's try to replace the fire spirit power with his own aura and see the effect. He quickly cleared the ash, revealing the dark stone slab under the fireplace. He used a knife as a pen and carved out a magic circle in one go. Then he placed the pottery jar on it and mobilized his own spiritual energy to inject it into the pottery jar. Soon, the mixture of fish oil and minerals became clear under the effect of spiritual energy and magic circle. It's done. Jaehaerys was delighted. He used his spiritual sense to explore the inside of his pot of wildfire. If it was the wildfire made by the fire wizards, he would not dare to do this. To put it bluntly, spiritual sense is a kind of spiritual energy, which then turns into yang shen. Traditional wildfire is extremely unstable. Who knows if the spiritual sense will explode immediately after entering? He is just building a foundation, not invulnerable to water and fire. But his pot of wildfire is different. It has its own spiritual energy and will not reject the power of his spiritual sense. Under the influence of the divine consciousness, the inside of the wildfire is clearly visible. Its own spiritual power connects the other three elements, allowing them to form a relatively stable form with itself as the center. To put it in an analogy, a buffer layer is formed between the other three elements. Only when the buffer layer is broken or the spiritual power suddenly loses its peaceful state will it burst instantly. And now the color of this jar of wildfire has also changed a little. From an intuitive point of view, it is not so dark green. In the black pottery jar, it presents a positive green color. Well, this color is very positive, and it looks like a spring bud. In this way, calling it wildfire is a bit cheap. As the saying goes, after the rain, the sky is blue and the clouds are broken. If this color is used in the future, it will be called spring thunder. Hehe, I am really a little genius in naming. As for how powerful it is, it still needs to be tested. He brought the pottery jar to the godswood of the Red Keep. The godswood is a place where people who inherit the traditions of their ancestors and believe in the old gods come to pray and worship. Since the Andals crossed the sea, they have also retained the custom of the godswood, but for the Andals who believe in the seven gods, the godswood is just a place for leisure, walking and reading. There is a heart tree in each godswood. The heart trees of some castles are fish beams, which are huge pale trees with human facial features in the series. The heart tree of the Red Keep godswood is a big oak tree with smokeberry vines climbing on its branches, and a plant called dragon beard grass is everywhere under it. Jaehaerys looked around. The godswood was silent. At this time, the servants were preparing food, and the ladies would gather in the small chapel of the Red Keep to pray to the gods. This place has been abandoned for a long time. He took out the pottery jar and found a flat and empty place. There happened to be a big stone here. The part exposed on the ground was like the back of an old cow lying down. It was smooth and shiny, and the edges were almost patinated. It seemed that someone often lay on it to enjoy the cool. Hehe, look at my palm thunder. Jaehaerys shouted, imagining that he became the Thunder King in the game. He stretched out his hand and threw it. The ball lightning flew out from the palm of his hand and electrocuted the enemy into a fool. However, the actual situation was a little bit off. The weight of the pottery jar was indeed a bit too heavy for him. In addition to the problem of technique, the position originally aimed at the bull's head was biased towards the bull's buttocks. Bang, puff, and in an instant, a burst of green light rose from the thing, and the green light penetrated down along the stone wall. From a distance, it looked like the stone cow had diarrhea, and it was green. The spring thunder burned on the stone for a long time. Wherever it flowed, it would be assimilated into a yang green flame. Unlike the red and orange firewood, it seemed to have no temperature at all, like a green elf wearing a bikini, cheering and jumping on branches, stones and water, leaving a series of black footprints. Until I got closer, I found that fire is fire after all. It is the guide who guides mankind out of the barbaric era of eating raw meat and drinking blood. It is the mercy and reward from the gods. After gradually extinguishing, Jaehaerys walked forward and saw that the tail of the cow had been burned and melted a little. He carefully stirred it with a wooden stick. Soon the front end of the stick was burned into black charcoal by the high temperature. With a strong pull, it formed a spiral upward horn, a bit like the glass firing process I have seen before. However, the poor craftsman did not have much skills. He could only use a stick to poke and poke. After a while, stalagmites, stone pillars, and stone corals grew on the originally flat and smooth stones, and they were all very sharp. The ground was also burned black. The sparse grass that had been trying to survive in the cracks had turned into ashes, which was so desolate. Jaehaerys couldn't bear it. He couldn't ruin the lives of these insignificant lives because of his own evil deeds. So he pulled dry grass from somewhere else and spread it on the ground and stones. The dry grass was already full of grass seeds. In order to strengthen the nutrition, he also specially came to soak the boy's urine. I think after the spring rain next year, this place will be full of vitality again. He left with satisfaction. The result of the spring thunder experiment made him very happy. Although it was a bit spiritual, it solved the problem of stability. It is a big killer. But it is not suitable to expose it now. To put it bluntly, no matter what era it is, one or two weapons of war cannot change the tide of the times. Unless the quantitative change leads to qualitative change, it will only cause some trouble at best. He decided to wait until he arrived at Dragonstone Island, settled down, and improved the magic circle first when he made further progress in cultivation. He would use the thinking of talismans to solve the framework problem. Otherwise, he would be exhausted, and how many more cans of spring thunder could he make? You suck ginseng and deer antlers, and I suck ginseng like wine. What's the point of that? There is a fierce dragon in the pocket. Fried eggs love pear-shaped locks, and the senior sister has become spicy. Jaehaerys hummed a strange tune and returned to his room. But he always felt that he seemed to have forgotten something. After thinking about it carefully, it was too happy to make wildfires. I forgot to ask the old warlock not to burn the city. Oh, the city didn't really burn in the end. It's not a big problem. Go back to sleep. Sir, why are we standing still? King's Landing is like a naked girl, waiting for us to ravage her. In Robert's tent, the generals surrounded a pale man with indifferent eyes. The tall, one-eyed man with a bad temper asked, pulling the man's cloak. Sir Umber, if you continue to be so rude, I don't mind taking your other eye. The man spoke softly. He was neither strong nor tall. Compared with the one-eyed man, he was like a thin dog. But when he opened his mouth, everyone had to stop making noise and concentrate on listening to him. Every female individual of human beings will bleed once a month when they reach a certain age. The bleeding lasts for a week, and it has not stopped yet. But the male individual in front of him is amazing. He will bleed every few days. This person is Roose Bolton, the current Earl of the Dreadfort. He has a noble bloodline. His ancestors were forbidden to practice the ancestral craft of skinning because they liked to skin people. But it doesn't matter, he has other hobbies. If he can't peel people's skin, there's nothing wrong with me bleeding myself. So he often put leeches on his body, sucking blood, feeling the blood flowing, and the toxins flowing out of the body with the dirty blood. He felt relaxed all over, as if his soul ascended to heaven, and the joy in his heart was beyond description. To be honest, he and a certain vampire Earl on Blue Star are really a perfect match made in heaven. One loves bleeding and the other loves sucking blood, perfect. That is to say, there are no vampires in this world, otherwise he would have done it to himself. Duke Robert has ordered that all lords, big and small, should obey the command of the Duke of the North, and our Duke Stark and his eldest brother, obviously have different personalities. Earl Bolton took a sip of spiced mulled wine. It must be said that the wine in the Riverlands is worse than that in the north, with a sour taste. Maybe it's not close enough to the south, otherwise why does the wine on the arbor exude a summer sweetness? But there are also benefits here. His little cuties have grown fatter and stronger, and there are even top-quality white cuties that are rarely seen in the north. At this time, a messenger, under the protection of the guards, opened the curtain of the big tent and walked in. Lord Bolton, the Duke has an order. Because there were no maesters and ravens in the army, the communication with the main force could only rely on the messengers. Fortunately, their position was not too far forward, and the messengers could convey the latest military orders in half a day. Roose Bolton opened the leather tube and took out a wax-sealed parchment scroll with a dire wolf pattern. In front of everyone, he opened the wax seal and flattened the parchment scroll with both hands. Oh, my lords, we have an opponent. The Earl of the Dreadfort still said in his usual tone. The Lannisters have sent troops from Castle Rock, and Duke Tywin is leading 10,000 Westerland soldiers, 2,000 knights and attendants along the Golden Road to King's Landing. The current intention is unclear. The Duke thinks they might be soldiers who are loyal to the king, and ordered us to do a good job of reconnaissance and ensure our own safety. One of our northern men can beat 10 of them. Those young masters from the western region are dressed in fancy clothes, but they are just a group of summer knights and are vulnerable. That's right, let's smash their helmets with maces and flails. For a while, the crowd was excited. They had been in so corner for several days and urgently needed to march and fight to satisfy their killing desires. A series of victories had made them dizzy. No, perhaps they originally looked down on the knights in the south, who were arrogant and rough in winter. Lord Bolton raised a hand, and the generals gradually fell silent. Lord Severn, Lord Dustin, I need you to send your elite knights to investigate the enemy along the way. If there is any situation, report it immediately and do not engage in battle with the enemy at will. My lords, prepare yourselves and be ready to fight at any time. 2 men wearing chain mail, lined with black wool and leather vests, turned around and left after receiving the order, and the others also got busy. The peaceful time is always short, and soon King's Landing is filled with a happy atmosphere. Jaehaerys heard that Duke Tywin had led his army to support King's Landing and would soon arrive outside the city. Now the whole King's Landing is talking about Duke Tywin being the savior of King's Landing. He put aside his disputes with the king and fulfilled his obligations to his king. Glory is as precious as gold. Jaehaerys sneered. Tywin hadn't arrived yet, but the whole King's Landing was speaking well of him. If he hadn't known the plot, he wouldn't have believed that Tywin had done anything dirty. He had no honor to speak of. He was just a cruel and ruthless executioner. Some things had to be arranged in advance, not for the Targaryens, but because of the unresolved anger and hatred in his heart. At the King's Royal Council, everyone was arguing. The main conflict was whether to allow reinforcements to enter the city, if they were indeed reinforcements. If Jaehaerys knew about the dispute at the Royal Council, he would probably sigh that there were still people who understood. The Warden of the West, the Duke of Castle Rock, Lord Tywin Lannister's brother, Kevan Lannister, and Esser Tygett Lannister had led 1,000 knights and the same number of servants to the outskirts of the city outside the Lion Gate in the afternoon. That was the beginning of the Golden Avenue. Another 10,000 infantry and knights were heading straight to King's Landing along the Golden Avenue. Their speed was so fast that it was jaw-dropping. Tywin was indeed a veteran general who was well versed in the art of speed. Esser Kevan sent an envoy to the Red Keep before dusk, asking to enter the city to coordinate defense. After receiving the letter from the messenger, the king immediately convened a royal meeting, where the ministers were divided into 2 groups. One group, represented by Grand Maester Pycelle, supported the Lannister army entering the city, while the other group, represented by King's advisor Rosart and intelligence chief Varys, believed that Lannister had ulterior motives and was indecisive, and was likely to have secretly surrendered to the rebellion. The 2 factions were arguing, and the other important officials were just watching the show quietly. Don't ask, because if you ask, everyone is right, and His Majesty is the king who makes the final decision. My lords, think about it. If Lord Tywin really wanted to rescue, why didn't he immediately raise an army to respond when His Majesty called for him? Why didn't he attack the rebels from behind when His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was fighting the rebels? Why didn't you keep silent when you raised the army, and only report to His Majesty after arriving in King's Landing? Varys could no longer keep his usual smile at this moment. For the first time, the octopus spider showed a ferocious look, as if he was not looking at his colleagues but a group of idiots. Pycelle had some wrinkles on his face, and his beard that grew to his chest was half gray and half white. His bachelor's necklace was very heavy, and the amount of precious metals such as gold and silver on it far exceeded other things. Lord Varys, you can't lose your mind because of jealousy and resentment. We all know that Lord Tywin is loyal to His Majesty. Besides, in this critical moment, who else can save the country except Lord Tywin? Your Majesty, I believe you also know that although Lord Tywin has had some disagreements with you, he has always stood firmly on your side in the face of national issues. If you didn't disagree, his beloved daughter and His Royal Highness the Crown Prince would have become a pair of fairy lovers. Of course, I'm not saying that you did something wrong. After all, your foresight, and preparedness for danger in times of peace are also admired by Tywin and my ministers. Aerys too hoped to be recognized and applauded by others throughout his life. Unfortunately, he hardly did many things that people applauded, leaving behind only the infamy of cruelty and irritability, and even this infamy eventually ruined many of his descendants' merits. The king sat on the iron throne placed at the highest point of the throne room. It is an iron lump covered with spikes, sharp corners and twisted metal. There are also many spikes on the back of the chair. Sitting on it will only make people feel uncomfortable, and people cannot sit against the back of the chair. People who sit on it must always worry about not being hurt by the spikes and barbs on it. The once cruel Maegor died under its spikes, and the young King Viserys I was scratched by the barbs, resulting in serious infection and finally died. Compared with these two kings, although the Iron Throne often scratched Aerys too, even if it did not cause serious consequences, it was a great blow to him, because there has been a rumor circulating in the market that the Iron Throne will cut people who are not worthy of being a king. In this regard, although Aerys too executed several people who gossiped, it was ultimately difficult to stop the mouths of the people. If we talk about who knows Tywin best, it must be Aerys too. They have loved and hated each other for many years and are very familiar with each other. If there is a chance, Aerys will definitely want to kill Tywin, but unfortunately, he has never found an opportunity for so many years. Aerys is indeed moody, but he will not kill without reason. Killing Rickard Stark and his heir Brandon Stark also gave them a reason for treason and conspiracy to kill the crown prince, but the means are indeed extremely cruel. He had verbally violated Joanna Lannister, the beautiful wife of Duke Tywin, many times, and also wanted to take the opportunity to anger Tywin, so that he would do irrational behavior and justify the other party. Unfortunately, as a man, Tywin could even endure this. If you say that Tywin has no hatred for him, Aerys will never believe it. He believes that Tywin must be holding back bad things, but what does it matter? He knows Tywin too well. The latter wants to eradicate all his bloodline, but his most beloved heir is in his hands. Come here, is the little lion behaving well today? King Aerys II asked the squire. Your Majesty, Sir Jaime has been on duty today and behaved well. After his shift, he returned to his room in the White Sword Tower, and hasn't come out yet. The squire Daoist replied. He was a clever young man with a pair of eagle eyes that saw through everything. He had been the cupbearer of the late King Jaehaerys II and the squire of King Aerys II. It stands to reason that he should have been canonized as a knight by King Aerys II long ago, but he had been wasting more than 10 years on this great career of being a squire. Go wake him up, don't let the cunning little lion sneak away. Aerys too decided to take a look at his hostages before making the final decision. During the waiting period, the king's hand, Earl Colton Chester, stood up and said, Your Majesty, I heard that you asked the fire wizards to bury wildfires everywhere in the city. This is absolutely not allowed. Aerys held his chin with his hand and squinted at Roset, feeling annoyed. How did the Prime Minister know about this? Your Majesty, Lord Roset and a group of wise men come in and out all day long. As long as they are interested, who can't find out? Not only me, but everyone here knows it well. In my opinion, wildfire is extremely dangerous. Once it gets out of control, the entire city's military and civilians will be swallowed by the fire of hell. Prime Minister, rest assured, Advisor Roset and his companions will ensure that wildfires are only started when necessary. Your Majesty, even if they are temporarily safe, this move is no less than putting a noose around the necks of the people of the city. I think it is unnecessary. Humph, you are a minor noble, and I promoted you to the high position of Prime Minister, not to let you talk nonsense. You have neither a good strategy to retreat nor the ability to manage the world. You just chatter all day long. What use do I have for you? Your Majesty, thank you for your love and for not treating me as humble and lowly, but I am sorry that I cannot obey your order to burn the city. If you must do this, I can only betray your trust. The Prime Minister took off the necklace symbolizing the king's hand. In this case, come. Drag this man out and burn him to death. At the same time, Jaehaerys found the chief blacksmith of the Red Castle. He wanted to make a weapon of his own. After learning the ape swordsmanship, although there was no opportunity for actual combat, it was still very necessary to choose a long sword that suits him. The chief blacksmith of the Red Keep, named Ion Walker, is said to have learned the technology of forging and casting valyrian steel from Qohor or other free trade cities, so he was naturally targeted by Jaehaerys. Jaehaerys was indeed not strong enough to pick up a two-handed greatsword, so he commissioned Ion Walker to make a slender half-hand sword for him. This is a long sword between a two-handed greatsword and a one-handed sword. The sword guard and hilt are made of soft steel and dragon bone respectively, and the sword body is only 2 fingers wide, all forged with valyrian steel. Due to the influence of film and television dramas, Jaehaerys has always thought that weapons made of valyrian steel are very rare, such as the Blackfire and Dark Sisters, that have been passed down from the Targaryen family but have disappeared, the giant sword, Ice, of the Stark family, the Broken Heart, of the Tully family, and the Long Claw, of the Mormont family, etc. All of them are treasures that have been passed down for hundreds or even thousands of years, but when he opened the royal treasury, his faith suddenly collapsed. Who dared to believe it? There were more than a dozen weapons made of valyrian steel, large and small. He saw a slender dagger with a dragon bone handle and a two-handed sword as long as a person, all made of valyrian steel. That's right, according to incomplete statistics, there are nearly 200 weapons made of valyrian steel in the entire Westeros continent. The royal family has been in power for 300 years, so what are a dozen weapons? The half-hand sword of Jaehaerys was forged from a valyrian dagger that had fallen into dust in the treasure house. Some people may ask, since there are so many magical weapons, why not use ready-made ones? As the saying goes, soldiers are deceitful and must be investigated. Those swords, short swords and daggers were either too long and heavy for him, or too short and too light, and could not fully utilize his strength. So it would be better to invite a famous master to create an exclusive piece of equipment for you. After the sword is completed, it will be 3 feet long, thin and slender, with an overall weight of no more than 1 kilogram. It is slightly narrower than the standard half-hand sword of the Red Castle, but the sword body is specially forged. Triangular cross-section, good for breaking armor. Its toughness and strength are not inferior to the famous swords passed down from generation to generation. The dark blade of the sword has a hint of bright white lines, like a meteor in the dark night, so Jaehaerys named it Meteor. The reason why famous swords are famous is that the material and craftsmanship are good, but the factor of the user is more critical. For example, Blackfire is the sword of Aegon the Conqueror, and Lightbringer is the sword of Azor Ahai. Although the current Meteor sword is not famous, when Jaehaerys becomes famous all over the world, Meteor will also be included in the world's famous swords. James rubbed his groggy eyes and yawned. The king sent an attendant to wake him up, so he had to follow Daoist to report to the king. But unexpectedly, I found that all the royal ministers were gathering in the hall, coming to the meeting again. Alas, the prime minister was nowhere to be seen, and there seemed to be a strong burnt smell in the air, which made James feel shuddering. Look, the little lion is safe and sound, Iris too said to the ministers. The opponents were speechless. No one thought that Tywin Lannister would turn a blind eye to his eldest son. Even if his heart was as hard as stone, after all, he couldn't let the dwarf boy inherit the title of duke, right? Aerys too did not explain to Jaime, but just waved his hand to let him go back to rest, and at the same time arranged for people to watch his every move again. James scratched his head. Although he felt baffled by the Mad King's actions, he was also used to it. On the way back to the White Sword Tower, he suddenly remembered his father's autographed letter, and he felt like he was struck by thunder. His mother, seems to have overslept. One day's ride from King's Landing, Lord Tywin was sitting on a high-headed warhorse, wearing red steel plate armor as bright as fire, inlaid with gold swirl-shaped decorations, and a lion helmet on his head. It is set with a circle of sunburst-shaped diamonds, and the lion's eyes are 2 huge pigeons' blood rubies. On its shoulders, 2 golden lionesses fasten a long and heavy golden cloak. The horse armor is also plated with gold and is made of gold. Crimson silk is used as decoration, and the lion crest of House Lannister can be seen everywhere. The armor is even more gorgeous than Rhaegar's ruby 3-headed dragon plate armor. He recalled the autographed letter he sent to his eldest son through the secret passage. James must have found a safe place according to his instructions at this time. He had been the Mad King's prime minister for 20 years and did not dare to speak about other parts of the Red Keep. However, Prime Minister Tarna was too familiar with him. Since he stepped down as the king's hand, there have been 3 prime ministers in just 2 years. Owen Marie Weiss, John Connington, and Colton Chested. But they were all inactive people, and the current situation was turbulent. How could they have the heart to explore the secrets of the tunnels of the Prime Minister's tower? Varys might know something about it. That pesky spider often uses the tunnels of the Red Keep to find out secrets. However, there are so many secret passages in the Red Keep, and it is very possible for James to escape safely, either intentionally or unintentionally. Soldiers are valuable and quick, so we can't delay any longer. Pass my order, speed up, and make sure to arrive at King's Landing before tomorrow afternoon. Tywin shouted, taking the lead in riding his horse and whipping his whip, and the well-trained Western soldiers immediately got busy. Jaehaerys waited until the end of the royal council. He had seen the Prime Minister being dragged out and burned. The scene was very scary. It was more terrifying than the dragon mother riding a dragon in the TV series, breathing dragon flames and burning people. He hid in the shadows and glanced back and forth among the crowd. Soon his eyes lit up. Roset was walking in front of the crowd, wearing a bright palm necklace around his neck. Roset also saw Jaehaerys. Other important ministers would think that the idle prince was just here to join in the fun, but he did not think that His Highness the Third Prince was the kind of person who aimed for nothing. From asking for wildfire production technology to showing extraordinary talent, everything proves that he is a real dragon. It's a pity that there are two obstacles ahead. Otherwise, under his introduction, the Alchemist Guild will definitely be more prosperous, and it will not be the false and slanderous prosperity it is now. But, what if they all died? Oh my God. Gods forgive me, I shouldn't be so vicious. But my thoughts spread, twist and nod like poison ivy. Your Highness, what's the problem with creating wildfires? Roset said with a pleasant look when he saw that he was far away from everyone. Congratulations on becoming the hand of the king. I do have some ideas. I need help from you or your guild. Jaehaerys didn't refute, he was just here to get people killed. The Lannister army has not yet entered the city. At this moment, he still has room to maneuver. Everyone in the Alchemist Guild is talented and well-spoken. After the city is defeated, how many green onions will be left? Of course, the most important thing is that it is better to use them for my own benefit than to leave them to the enemy. If the wildfire had not been buried everywhere in King's Landing, he would have wanted to set it all on fire. It is a pity to leave this strategic killer to the enemy. I don't quite understand what you mean, Your Highness. Well, I want to move the Alchemist Guild to Dragonstone. How can this be possible? Roset was shocked and angry. This prince is good at everything, but he just wants to do whatever he wants. He is a little out of touch with the world. The Alchemist Guild has never left King's Landing for hundreds of years. Do you know why? It is because this place has a huge population and unparalleled trade conditions. Wildfire. The manufacture of this material requires the full efforts of the royal family to ensure it. Your Highness, please forgive me for being frank. In addition to obsidian and castles, how much help can Dragonstone provide us? Jaehaerys did not think so much. In his opinion, aren't the main materials for wildfire fish oil and green amphibole? Fish oil can be made with fish. With the sea at your back, you can have as much as you want. Although it is not clear where the green amphibole is produced, how expensive can it be with such a narrow application scenario? In fact, he made an empiricist mistake. After all, this is not the world with extremely abundant materials and extremely developed trade. There are thousands of tons of large trawlers everywhere, and some even have a displacement of tens of thousands of tons. One net can catch dozens or hundreds of tons of fish. In addition to marine fishing, there is also offshore aquaculture, and even seafood aquaculture far inland. Can you believe it? In mineral mining, he lives in a city with relatively rich mineral resources. Many years ago, when private mining was carried out, minerals were continuously mined from the ground, so he really did not have enough understanding of the backward productivity of this era. Jaehaerys was stunned for a moment, then his eyes turned and he said with great sorrow, "My lord, I am not seeking personal gain, but to save the Alchemist Guild's heritage for thousands of years." Roset was old and his mind was a little confused. He was used to obeying orders but rarely considered whether the orders were correct. Or, most people in this world were in this state. What do you mean? Roset asked anxiously. Did my father ask you to ignite wildfires in various parts of King's Landing when necessary? That's right. Roset complained in his heart that the king asked us to keep the secret, but he told his relatives in a blink of an eye. Yes, Aerys too did not publicize it at this time. He arranged to bury the fires in various parts of King's Landing after the Battle of the Trident, and they were all transported and arranged quietly in the dead of night. Only the ministers and specific handling personnel knew about it. He also knew that if it was leaked, the whole King's Landing would immediately collapse, so he asked those who knew about it not to reveal a single word. But the old sorcerer didn't know, thinking that the king had revealed the news to the royal family, otherwise how would Prince Jaehaerys know? Besides, the prince said before that he had a dragon dream. Thinking of this, he no longer concealed it and nodded in agreement. But do you know that if you really do this, the entire guild will be in an irreparable situation? Would you like to hear more? Think about it carefully. If the nobles and civilians in the city knew that the alchemist guild set fire to their homes and took the lives of their loved ones, what would they do? Jaehaerys did not wait for the old man to answer, and asked himself. They will pick up any weapon, swords, sickles, hoes, sticks, stones, and rush to Visenya Hill without hesitation. The angry people will overturn the gate of the guild, rush in and smash everything they can see along the way. All the wise men, assistants, and servants will be smashed into pulp by the mobs who are already bloodthirsty. At that time, your knowledge passed down for thousands of years and the secrets hidden deep underground will all be burned to ashes. In the first few years, there may still be people who gnashed their teeth at what you did, but after decades, the old people died, and no one knew your name and your glory from then on. The alchemists passed down by word of mouth will only become synonymous with lunatics and ghosts. The old warlock's eyes were straight and his face was pale. He knew that what Jaehaerys said was true. Wildfires might burn many people to death, but people are not wood or stone. They will run when facing wildfires. As long as someone ran away, when they returned, they would definitely vent their anger on them, the arsonists. Gods above, he really didn't dare to think about it according to the prince's words. Your Highness, can you avoid all this by moving the guild to Dragonstone? The old warlock laughed bitterly. The guild is a group of like-minded wise men united together. Under the guidance of the king, we walk in the world in his name, obey his orders, and respond to his call. How can we do what we want without your majesty's orders? Jaehaerys thought for a while and said, if we can't move everyone away, can we let some people go first? King's Landing is in chaos right now, and it won't be easy to attract other people's attention if there are fewer pyromancers who don't show up often. Roset took a deep look at the young prince. As the chief pyromancer of the alchemist guild, he couldn't let the inheritance of thousands of years be cut off in his hands. So even though he knew this was the prince's little trick, he couldn't ignore the latter's deduction. Forget it. Forget it. Anyway, they are all working for the Targaryen family. What's the difference between King's Landing and Dragonstone? Thinking of this, he felt much more relaxed. Pyromancers are like the wildfires they create. As long as the fire is preserved, there will always be a day when the fire will spread all over the prairie. After he returns, he plans to arrange some young wise men and assistants to leave by boat at night, but before that, he must contact his old friend Sir Tywin, the captain of the King's Landing Maritime Guard and a veteran under the command of the Minister of the Navy, Earl Lucerys Valyrian. In charge of the inland and offshore patrol fleets covering hundreds of leagues from the upper reaches of the Blackwater River to the Spear of the Mermaid King in Blackwater Bay, one of his favorite things to do is to hang pirates and smugglers on the ram of the warship, half of their bodies immersed in the water to feed sharks. Therefore, during his 10 years in office, countless pirates and smugglers were frightened. When they heard the heavy drums of the oarsmen, the drifting of the sails and the rhythmic creaking of the wooden oars, they immediately fled thousands of miles away and did not dare to confront them at all. Thinking of this, he called his followers and asked Sir Tredemont to come to the Alchemist Guild later. Seeing this, how could Jaehaerys not understand that he had achieved his goal? However, he came here for more than just this one thing today, so he hurriedly supported the old man's arm. This old man is still very useful in the future, so you have to be a little careful and don't let the old man fall. My lord, I have another thing to ask for. Roset enjoyed the prince's respect and compliments. Although he looked terrified, he felt so happy in his heart. He solved the crisis of the survival of the Alchemist Guild, and his heart was even more grateful to Jaehaerys. Your Highness, you might as well speak frankly. Do you remember the dragon dream I told you about before? The golden wave swept across the entire King's Landing. Jaehaerys persuaded him step by step. Rosit is an honest man, and a devout believer in mysticism. He was impressed by the dragon dream he heard for the first time in his life. Well, to put it bluntly, it has only been a few days, and the old man has not suffered from amnesia. Of course, but what does this mean? Prophecies are rarely particularly clear. They are like the mumbling in a drunken dream, the clouds gathering and dispersing over the temple, which require people to interpret and guess. Until the last moment, people suddenly realize that it is like this. I guess the gods told me that it was not your wildfire that destroyed King's Landing, but someone else. I heard that in the Far East, in far east of the skeleton mountains of Essos, there is a magic, and some people use the 5 substances between heaven and earth to symbolize the changes of all things in the world. Are you talking about the 5 elements of gold, wood, water, fire and earth? Rosit couldn't help but ask. When he was young, he also traveled across the narrow sea and knew how vast the world was, but due to his lack of money, he could only stop in the free trade city-states, but it was there that he heard many secret rumors. Yes, Jaehaerys couldn't help but sigh. This old man is really good, with such a supporting role. It's like drinking a glass of iced sour plum soup in the dog days of summer, refreshing from head to toe. In the 5 elements theory, gold represents the west, so the west is rich in gold. And just at this time, the Lord of Castle Rock led his troops to King's Landing. Your Highness, are you saying that Lord Tywin will be bad for King's Landing? That's right. I think they are not the light of hope to save King's Landing, but the flood that will destroy King's Landing. I hope everyone will support it and subscribe more.